Chapter 356. The warmth was short-lived. If the elven inhabitants of Kuel Salis Longsong Forest died tragically because of personal matters, the warmth tonight would become a scar in the future. In fact, less than 5 minutes after Aurelia ran away, she turned back, slightly lowered her head, shoulders slumped and clenched her fists. I know it's too much, but the horde is heading towards Kuel Salis. They've already left us behind. We've already lost a few days. If we don't gather the troops as soon as possible, we'll only be left further behind. Duque naturally grabbed Aurelia's arms with both of his hands. It's a taboo for the army to suddenly wake up and march in the middle of the night. We humans don't have the elven's night vision. Just marching alone will cause a lot of problems. I also have to guard against the horde army that stayed behind to ambush us. Ambush. Yes, ambush. I have to say, Orgrim did a good job. He knew that we would come here to help the Wildhammer dwarves. So he led the main force to the north, leaving behind some to slow us down. For example, the orcs that feigned an attack during the day, or the one hiding in the depths of the hinterlands forest. There's more. Aurelia's eyes widened. She suddenly felt a chill down her spine. If Duque really let the army march through the night under her request, then they would undoubtedly be ambushed by the horde hidden in the forest. In the dark, the performance of the human army was very poor, as long as they chose the right place to ambush. Even if they couldn't defeat the humans immediately, they could drag the battle into a chaotic battle that the orcs were best at. In a chaotic battle, the orcs' individual combat power would increase exponentially. They could even rely on the chaotic battle to defeat the human reinforcements. At that time, Quell the Loss would truly be isolated and helpless. At this moment, Aurelia realized the difference between her and Duque. She might be a competent battlefield commander, but she wasn't good at strategy. In front of commanders like Duke and Orgrim, she wasn't even worth looking at. In fact, Aurelia could not imagine how difficult the task of the reinforcements was. Chasing after an elite army, moving with all their might, and defending against possible ambushes. She only hoped that they could arrive at the Longsong Forest in time. Then what should we do? The main force of the Beastmen is so far away from us. Every second we delay will allow the tribe to get closer to Kuel Salis. Even if she didn't want to admit it, Duque was the only one who could give her advice at this time. Nothing much. You came all the way from Kuel Salis, so you must be very tired. I suggest that you have a good sleep first, then. When Duque saw the stubborn look in Aurelia's eyes, he smiled bitterly. Well, if I don't solve the mystery, you won't rest, right? Aurelia's bright eyes stared at Duque, as if saying, you already know the answer. Duque shrugged. This isn't a fair competition in the arena. If Orgrim can send his army to harass us, why can't I send people to stop them? Don't forget who predicted that the horde would march this way. Well, the hint is FFF. FFF was naturally Duque's flamethrower army. It was now the middle of summer in May, so it wasn't too difficult to set fire to the forest. Even though Aurelia hated burning the forest as an elf, they were facing a great enemy. And she wasn't a druid who believed in nature. It didn't matter if it was a black or white cat, as long as it could catch mice, it was a good cat. Because of the battle in the Silverpine Forest, Lordaeron had used up almost all of their forces in the rear. It was not realistic for Lordaeron to send troops to stop Orgrim's elite army. There was no other way to delay the horde's army with a small number of troops. Aurelia came to a sudden realization, and her expression suddenly became very interesting. Bastard, you already planned everything, and then force me to betray my country and become your vassal? Completely disregarding everything, Aurelia pounced on Duque, opened her white teeth, and bit down hard on his left shoulder. Ah, it hurts. Are you a puppy? It wasn't a joke. Aurelia's bite was really painful. It was as if her entire flesh was about to be torn off. Duque's tears flowed out. Aurelia's teeth were very good, but she didn't bite down anymore. Duque felt something wet on his shoulder. Aurelia was crying. Turning his head, Duque saw crystal-clear tears rolling down Aurelia's beautiful face. Duque was speechless for a moment. I know you didn't do this on purpose. If it wasn't for Anastrian and those bastards from the Silver Moon Council, you wouldn't have to be so uncomfortable. I just feel very tired. If I knew that a tragedy would happen but couldn't stop it, I would really collapse. I'm so tired, let me rest for a while. But I warn you, don't attack me. Otherwise, I will hate you. As she spoke, Aurelia hugged Duque and let out a sweet sound. Gently stroking Aurelia's long golden hair, Duque revealed a faint smile. You've worked hard, sleep well. Aurelia was indeed very tired. After Duque informed Quel Salis of the danger, because there were still a small number of tribal warships on the sea route, it was not safe. She first took a team of nearly 1,000 rangers, and marched nearly 1,000 kilometers back to quell the loss. After warning her motherland, and realizing that it was useless. Then he rushed to the Longsong forest and mobilized the people to prepare for evacuation. After realizing that the warning to her motherland was useless, she desperately rushed to the hinterlands to seek help from Duque. Ever since Duque arrived at the earthy highlands, Aurelia had not had a good rest. Now that she was finally relaxed, she naturally slept like a log. Duque carried her, gently put her on his bed, covered her with the quilt, and walked out of the door. As soon as he walked out of the door, Duque immediately sensed multiple gazes on his face. Humph. If you dare to take advantage of this time, I will definitely kill you. Queen Sylvanas left a harsh remark, and then left. Duke didn't reply. He stared blankly for 2 seconds as Queen Sylvie turned around and left. Then he rubbed his nose. I knew you were eavesdropping. Who the hell would touch Illyria at this time? Duque looked at Vanessa. The disobedient little maid suddenly muttered to herself. Sigh, I'm really a busy maid. I'm just a maid, but I have to follow her to the battlefield. I don't know if my black-hearted master will occasionally be kind enough to give me a raise. No matter how many times he saw Vanessa, Duque felt a little funny. This girl seemed to dislike him no matter what, but she would always help him with the housework. Well, your master is rich. In the future, your salary will be doubled. That's more like it. I can go change to a dagger. Is there a maid like you? Chapter 357. Duque. Master, I have to go prepare as well. Alicia also stood up and bowed. Actually it's going to be a rapid march. If you think it's too tiring, you don't have to go. Duque advised. No, it's better to serve the Alliance than to stay in a safe place and deal with those insincere courtship. Alicia smiled sweetly. Looking at Alicia's gentle and sweet smile, Duque felt that it seemed like forget it. Duque rubbed the back of his head, then rolled to the next room to catch up on his sleep. 8 o'clock in the morning. Whether they were willing or not, the leaders of the Alliance in the Eagle's Nest Mountain were all awake. Looking at Aurelia, who appeared beside Duque, and listening to the explanation of the military situation, Kudrin Wildhammer frowned. Even if we know that this is a feint, as long as the Horde army in the Hinterlands forest is not destroyed, the Wildhammer dwarves' homeland will still be threatened. This is not just a feint. I'm afraid that before ensuring the safety of the Eagle's Nest Mountain, the Wildhammer dwarves will not be able to provide any more assistance. Duque pointed at the map. The trolls have been here for thousands of years, and no one has been able to truly destroy them. So it's unrealistic to clear the hinterlands of the Horde and the trolls. What are you going to do? Kudrin stroked his big orange-red beard. We can't let this unknown force follow behind our main force or arrive before us. I'll let General Seamus stay in the hinterlands with 20,000 elites to ensure that this forest is completely cleared. Then we'll create a treeless isolation zone that is at least 2 kilometers wide, and build a series of sentry towers to ensure that every troll or orc passing by will be discovered. Looking at the straight line that Duque drew between the Troll's Nest and the Eagle's Nest Mountain, Kudrin was deep in thought. How? Or set a fire? Aren't you afraid of burning the entire hinterlands? Believe me, I'm a professional. I've done it before in the Elven Forest. Kudrin was quite speechless and nodded. Well, there are no druids among the dwarves. Duque continued. Then when you're free, I hope you can build a fortress here within a month. Duque was referring to the location of the Northern Sentinel Tower in the Eastern Plaguelands. It was just the right place to block the way from the Elves' Longsong Forest to the holy city of Stratholme. A month? Kudrin was surprised. We've done this before in Stormwind City, General Tom explained. This is a new material called cement. Of course, with enough cement, I can build a wall from Stratholme to Lordaeron in a month. I've already had Makarov prepare the cement in Stratholme. Then I have no problem. Tom nodded. Now that the situation was settled, Kudrin's brows relaxed. Thank you for your assistance, he said respectfully. When the hinterlands is safe again, my Griffin Knights and I will catch up with you and go to the north to deal with the remaining tribes. Thank you, King of the Barbarians. Duque bowed and turned to the others. All right, ladies and gentlemen, don't just stand there. Let's get to Kuel Salis in 10 days. 3 days later, Orgrim almost went mad with anger. This should have been a seamless transition. The humans would have panicked and thought that they would lead their army to break through the Poison Fog Canyon to the west to attack Alterac. They would have feared that they would attack Andoril to the northwest to attack Lordaeron. They would even think that they were going to attack the weakly defended Stratholme. Obviously, the humans had predicted their path. It was unknown whether or not Duke Marcus, who should have been killed 10,000 times, had anticipated this, but their path forward was blocked. If it was a human army of 100,000, Orgrim wouldn't be afraid. Unfortunately, it wasn't. A crimson light was reflected in the eyes of the orcs. They were no strangers to this kind of light, because they had seen it at almost the same time last year, when the orcs were determined to take down Stormwind City. There was one in the north, and another in the northwest, and a third in the northeast. The fourth red light in the west was getting brighter and brighter. Along with the red light, a huge pillar of black smoke pierced through the clouds. There were at least 4 fires, and it was obviously arson. The forest fire was so fierce that it seemed to light up the entire cloud layer, turning the clouds into rolling and burning clouds. When it was obvious that they lacked manpower, the humans directly set fire to the forest to stop the horde's advance. Not all orcs came from the Blackrock tribe that was born with high fire resistance. Similarly, even if the trolls had good self-healing abilities, they couldn't just pass through the burning forest. It was either turn around or wait for the forest fire to die out. Since the humans were already prepared, it was probably useless to turn around. Orgrim gritted his teeth and ordered, "Let's wait near Lake Meridal." The orcs originally won with time, but the humans were stalling for time. There weren't many humans here, but this was human territory after all. Orgrim originally wanted to use the large forest as cover to quickly pass through this area and enter Kuel Salis. Now it seemed that this idea had been foiled. Opening the map, for a moment, Orgrim thought of not fighting the High Elves, and directly attacking the major human cities, such as Stratholme or Lordaeron. But he immediately realized that Zujin was staring at him to see if he would fulfill his promise. The relationship between the orcs and trolls was still very weak. Orgrim knew very well that trolls had the qualities that the orcs needed. The orcs' talent determined that they were best suited to be warriors, and a few could be shamans or warlocks. The orcs lacked talent in long-range attacks. The presence of the trolls made up for this. Orgrim changed his mind. Zujin, I heard that the elves are the enemies of all trolls. You are right, Great Chief. The trolls here in Zul Mashar seem to be some Moss clan. The Moss clan, Zujin corrected Orgrim. All right, since our troops can't advance for now, I'll give you a mission. Contact the Moss clan, and ask them to attack Eversong Forest together? Orgrim's reddish-brown face had a sinister smile. Since we can't ambush them, let's attack openly. I want you and your people to contact all the trolls nearby. Let's play big. Chapter 358. The night was peaceful, peaceful and peaceful. The forest that had been burnt to a crisp was as silent as a graveyard that could bury everything. As the last spark in the forest died out, the heat between heaven and earth finally came to an end. A group of human sentries were stationed at the intersection of the Bluestone Path between 2 huge forests. They had a standard security system, with enough fire to expand their field of vision, as well as sentries that were either out in the open or in the dark. However, outside the shadow of the bonfire, a huge but completely silent shadow had snuck into their security perimeter. They slowed down and cautiously took each step on the charred, carbonized ground. Their hands gripped tightly onto various weapons to avoid making any clashing sounds as they moved. It was obvious that their worries were unnecessary. Humans were far less sensitive than their long-eared allies, the elves. The land was pitch black, with only the occasional ray of moonlight shining through the gaps between the thick clouds. The moonlight shone on the ground, creating a strange scene. Darkness was fatal to humans, but it was nothing to the trolls. After years of traversing the forest, the trolls had the innate ability, night vision. No, it should be said that the Dark Elves, who were a mutated branch of the Dark Trolls 14,000 years ago, had inherited their innate ability from the trolls. At that moment, the trolls' pupils dilated, sweeping away the darkness. Every detail of the burnt forest could be seen clearly. The trolls were furious at the humans who destroyed the forest. Therefore, when they attacked, they threw out spears that were filled with rage. Almost in an instant, a team of 12 people completely disappeared from this world. 3 days later, with the help of the fire blocking the horde's path, Duque's reinforcements had closed the distance between them and the horde to 120 kilometers. This was already a very sensitive distance. If they marched without any regard for their lives, they could reach the horde in half a day. But at that moment, Duque had lost track of the horde's army. It wasn't that Orgrim's army had disappeared, but all the scouts that Duque had sent out from Stratholme were killed. Not only did they kill the scouts, but even the 5 FFF flamethrower squads that Duque had sent out were wiped out. Duque's face was livid. What made Duque and Aurelia waver was yet to come. Knowing that his army's movements had been exposed, Orgrim decided to use a beautiful method of suppressing the enemy with information. He didn't just send out Zujin's troll army to hunt down human and elven scouts. He also ordered Zuluhid's dragoons to attack all the human settlements in the area. After all, this area was far from the complete destruction of the Eastern Plaguelands in the future. Not only was it barren, but it was also filled with plagues and death. As the rear of the Rotterdam Kingdom, it was still an important source of food. With most of their forces deployed to defend the borders of the Silverpine Forest, the Stratholme region, which was supposed to be the rear, was really empty. Many towns couldn't even gather a squadron of archers. Not to mention the red dragon that could fly around in the sky and spit fire. All of a sudden, the cities were in danger. The nobles of Maris Farm, Darrowshire, Stratholme, and other places all asked for help from Rotterdam. King Terenas, who was under great pressure, immediately threw stacks of letters to Duque. It made Duque want to die when he saw the magic letters. Orgrim is going to attack Stratholme? Windsor asked. No, this is just a smokescreen. Duque was very sure. If Orgrim dares to attack any human city before attacking Cuel Salis, I bet that the troll leader Zujin will definitely leave with his people. The problem is, no king in the Alliance knows the trolls like you do, and even knows who their leader is. Or, they know that you are right, but because of the pressure from below, they have no choice but to put pressure on you. Duque couldn't help but smile bitterly. Reggie, now you know that it's not easy to be the vice commander of the Alliance, right? Windsor nodded. I have to admit, Orgrim did a great job this time. Now the arrogant Silvermoon Council believes that the Horde is going to take care of Rotterdam. And Rotterdam can't wait for the Horde to leave. It doesn't matter if we fight the elves or jump into the sea, as long as we don't wander around their land. So we can only rely on the two ladies, Windrunner. Yes, let's set up camp. Since they had fewer soldiers than the Horde, Duque didn't dare to advance recklessly. He could play with the elves and attack the Horde from the front and back. Once they were ambushed, it would only be a matter of minutes before they were destroyed. He couldn't afford to gamble. On the other side, in the name of the Silvermoon, where are they? Aurelia held a long, thin sword in her hand as she ran in the forest. The leaves and branches made her look a little blurry. The few rangers had fanned out in all directions to expand their scouting range. However, when Aurelia found out that the trolls were their enemies, she hoped that they wouldn't break into the trolls' encirclement. She hoped that she or Servanas would find these evil green-skinned creatures first. Aurelia was confused again. Her logic and emotions told her that Duque's deduction was correct. In fact, it was because Aurelia obeyed and followed his arrangements that she would cross the mountains to search for the Horde. On the other hand, she couldn't help but think that if she hadn't come to Longsong Forest for help, She would have been able to face the invaders with her family and her compatriots and fight against the evil together with the orcs and trolls. It was a very contradictory feeling. She knew that Duque wanted her to separate from Kuel Salis for some special reason, but she couldn't give up her country and people. After all, this was the land she had lived and fought for thousands of years. Aurelia was very conflicted. At this moment, she suddenly heard a whistle in the wind. It was her sister calling her. Aurelia quickly rushed over. It was a fork in the forest. This was not a traditional path for people to walk, it was more like a path for animals. However, this path had a special meaning for the trolls. The trolls liked to use this kind of fork to announce important things. For example, this was a withered troll corpse hanging at a fork in the road. The color of the corpse's fur was still shiny, and all the feathers and tooth ornaments on the body were very new. But this troll seemed to have all the flesh and blood in its body. This is the former leader of a troll clan. He failed in some kind of leadership election ceremony, and was directly sacrificed to an evil god. Then I found that the entire clan migrated north. Chapter 359. Listening to the Windrunner sisters' report, Duque looked at the military map and rubbed his chin in thought. All the way to the north. Orgrim is amazing, Windsor, who had also seen through Orgrim's plan, sighed. Since we know the Horde's target is Kuel Salis, we should hurry and get ahead of the Horde. Servanas slammed the table. As soon as she finished speaking, she realized that everyone else had an expression that said, "You're right, but it's meaningless." Aurelia shook her head. That's why Orgrim is so smart. If we can't figure out where the Horde's main force is, we might be ambushed while we're marching. The Horde's army is far stronger than ours. If we're ambushed, everything will be over. We can expand our scouting range, Queen Servanas suggested, unwilling to give up. Aurelia still shook her head. There's no point in just warning us. With our current strength, if we fight the Horde in the wild, we'll lose. No one knew how many trolls had joined the Horde. The latest information was that at least 3 trolls had joined the Horde. The number of trolls in each clan had always been a mystery. The worst-case scenario was that Duque's 30,000 people ran into a 100,000 Horde army. No matter how brave these people were, they would just be cannon fodder. This was not a joke, because the strongest heroes of the Horde were among them. Orgrim, Gul'dan Gugul Zuluhid, Talon Gorfind. It didn't matter if Gul'dan tried his best. Even if Gul'dan used 20% of his power, Duque would definitely die, and there was a high chance that he would not be able to revive. After all, Gul'dan was an expert at using forbidden death magic. Duque did not want to be captured and turned into a ghoul or a frost lich when he finally succeeded in seducing Aurelia. Then I'll call the Windrunner's rangers back? Servanas said unwillingly. Duke continued to shake his head. Let's not talk about the chances of you winning against the trolls who are also adept in jungle warfare. Just the loss of stamina and energy from this round is enough to put you at an absolute disadvantage. Even if you kill all the elites of your family, you won't know where the main force of the tribe is. Windsor gritted his teeth. If only Wildhammer's air force had arrived earlier. We can at least fight against the wyverns of the Horde. Duque nodded. I have already sent a message to Kudrin. He promised to send us a squadron of griffins in 3 days. Phew, that's the only good news. However, our intelligence blockade has yet to be lifted. My people have noticed more and more troll hunters around the camp. Windsor brought up another matter. Duque muttered to himself. Now whether it was entering or staying, they would have to take a huge risk. If this army of 30,000 remained motionless for too long, they might attract Orgrim's attention. It wasn't impossible for him to launch a sudden counterattack. All motives still depended on the changes in the situation. Once he was close enough to the main force of the Horde, Orgrim would definitely not mind eating this human's tail. Let's retreat to the foot of the mountain near the hinterlands first. As for the warning, I can solve it the day after tomorrow at the latest. Aurelia's bright eyes widened. How? Dear Miss Aurelia Windrunner, are you interested in accompanying me on a trip to Dan Moro? Huh. What the hell? A trip to Dan Moro? Dan Moro was the region where the dwarves' iron furnace castle was located. The dwarves there were defending their main city to the death. It could be said that the entire Dan Moro was a tribe. Why did Duque suddenly want to travel to Dan Moro? Just as Aurelia was about to open her mouth and say something, Duque suddenly placed a finger on her red lips. The finger sank into her delicate red lips. It felt pretty good. Don't ask. Just trust me and follow me. I promise I won't let you down, Windrunner. Some things were just like that. In the past, Aurelia would definitely give Duque a hard knock on the back of his head. But now Aurelia often chose to believe in Duque. However, Queen Sylvanas was unhappy. She put her hands on her hips and interrogated Duque. Hey, don't forget, there's still a Windrunner here. Why do you have to bring me along? Duque smirked. There has to be a Windrunner in charge of scouting the camp. Sylvanas was infuriated. Duque was obviously abusing his position for personal gain. Unfortunately, she also knew that if she were to go, she would definitely not be so cooperative with Duque. You better remember this. Sylvanas turned her head and left. I'm going on patrol. Duque did not open a portal this time. It was not a good place to open a portal. This was because the place Duque wanted to go to did not have a fixed coordinate. This required Duque to use his brain and the system to lock onto the spatial location. What everyone did not expect was that Duque waved his hand and asked Vanessa to come over. Me. Vanessa was a little stunned. I need a skilled and trustworthy rogue. Upon hearing the word trustworthy, Vanessa, who still had the temperament of a little girl, immediately ran over to Duque. Then Vanessa regretted it a little, because Duque had suddenly put his claws on her waist. In fact, Duque was hugging one on each side. On the left was Vanessa, and on the right was Aurelia. Without giving them too much time to struggle shyly, Duque directly opened the portal. The dazzling bluish-purple arcane light turned into dozens of mysterious rune ribbons in the air, and began to spin. As a large amount of arcane energy overflowed, the two girls suddenly felt that their surroundings were a little blurry and unreal. A small hole was torn in space, and instantly, an unstoppable force sucked them in. Aha! Aurelia, who was experienced and knowledgeable, was slightly better. Little Vanessa was so scared that she hugged Duque tightly. Only then did Duque realize that Vanessa had already developed so well. Without saying anything, he directly injected the moral integrity of a Mediv into himself. At the very least, he would not make a fool of himself. This was not a traditional teleportation. The teleportation between the main cities of the major kingdoms had relatively fixed spatial coordinates and a stable spatial structure. This was a teleportation that temporarily locked onto a target, so it was more laborious. Duque quickly found the bronze-bearded dwarven kingdom's iron stove castle, and then quickly searched for his target. Fortunately, that thing was also very big, and Duque did not have to spend a lot of energy to find it. It was Nomarigan, a level 35 dungeon in the game in his previous life. Now, it was the former hometown of the gnomes that they were forced to abandon. Once upon a time, the dwarves of Iron Stove Castle and the gnomes of Nomarigan had a good relationship, but they did not live under the same roof. Because some gnome dared to die, his hometown collapsed. All kinds of monsters ran out and killed all the surviving gnomes. Most of the remaining gnomes turned into leper gnomes. Well, it was right to think of them as a kind of neurotic gnome. Looking at the unfamiliar scene in front of her, Aurelia was a little confused. What are we doing here? We are looking for the Yao Yao spirit. Chapter 360. A demon spirit? What kind of monster was that? Even though she was vomiting, Vanessa still stood up shakily. She pulled out her dagger and looked around cautiously. Duque gently stroked Vanessa's head. A demon spirit is a godly creature. It is harmless to humans and animals. But it can also be extremely troublesome. Many question marks popped up on Vanessa's head. Even though she had experienced more than one teleportation, Aurelia still could not get used to the jolting feeling that felt like all your internal organs were shaken out, stirred, and then stuffed back into your body. After a while, they finally had the mood to look at this strange underground city. Nomarigan was built 172 years ago. This technological miracle city in Dan Moro had been the main city of the gnomes for generations. 2 years ago, It was clear that there was another distortion in time and space, corresponding to the incorrect 21%. The major event that should have happened 20 years after the dark portal happened 2 years earlier. A group of evil rockjaws. Or perhaps it should be said that the cave dwellers invaded many parts of Danmoro, including the main city of the gnomes. In order to kill these intruders, which were much larger and stronger than the gnomes, the great craftsman Mechatork ordered the city's emergency radiation tank to be opened. The gnomes were waiting for the rockjaws to die or escape, while also looking for a way to avoid the radiation. Unfortunately, although the rockjaws were infected by the radiation, their attacks did not stop, nor did they weaken. The gnomes that were not killed by the radiation were forced to flee. They found shelter in the nearby dwarven city of Ironstove Castle. The great craftsman Mechatork formed a think tank to discuss a plan to recapture their beloved city. Of course, before the gnomes succeeded, this place was a typical lawless place. In fact, before Duque transmigrated, he still remembered that the gnomes did not succeed in their battle. It could not be said that there was no progress. It was just the so-called progress of recapturing one of the main gates. What entered Duke and the other two's eyes was an extremely steampunk-style city. There were huge metal objects everywhere. Long and heavy cantilevers, steam or unknown gas spewing everywhere, and shining lights. Although Duke really wanted to give the gnome a high-tech name, but he didn't want to. However, Duque, who came from a more modern and more technologically advanced society, couldn't give a higher evaluation of the huge iron sheet walls and the mechanical devices that could only be fixed with ugly willows. Of course, to the world of Azeroth, everything here was undoubtedly black technology. Yep, in this world, other than the true black technology left behind by the creation titans, the races with the most high-tech elements would undoubtedly be the goblins, who had the spirit of courting death and would easily explode no matter what they did, and the dwarves, who were crazy and prone to making mistakes. Just like how the earliest steam engine might not be as powerful as a horse, the current gnome technology was a little similar. Even if a certain creation had epic-making significance from head to toe, it was very likely that it would not be able to defeat a violent demolition unit. Now the Elf Ranger General, who advocated nature, was unhappy. He felt that the current Aurelia wanted to give everything she saw a steady shot. Duque rubbed his eyebrows and directly opened the ice barrier. The fierce cold wind circled clockwise in the form of a tornado, surrounding Duque and the two girls. This is... Vanessa looked at the massive ice barrier, which had a diameter of 20 meters. As Duque moved forward, she was so surprised that she could not speak. She had always known that Duque was powerful, but she did not expect that Duque could use this barrier to drive away the purple dust floating in the air. Time was running out, so Duque did not explain too much. He then led the two women into the depths of Gnomerigan. Aurelia was surprised because it seemed that no one had been here for a long time. Duque was obviously very familiar with this place. Have you been here before? No, but I've read about this place in detail in the books. Duque said something that even he himself did not believe. It was exactly the time when he took his brothers to play dungeons until he threw up. There were subterranean dwellers that were only half the height of a human, or leprosy gnomes that were even shorter and had disgusting blisters all over their bodies, but Duke easily took care of them with Hand of Magic's Ice Spear spell. Duque was completely indifferent to these monsters that could only cause trouble for earth mages. The first floor, the second floor, the third floor. It was almost like an outing. Duque led the two girls through rooms, through boxes, and all kinds of high-altitude drops. Finally, they came to the fourth floor of Gnomerigan. It was an enormous steel passage. The passage of the fourth floor in reality was much larger than Duque had imagined. It was a full 50 meters wide and more than 30 meters tall. In the steel passage, there were iron floors and iron handrails all the way. With their dynamic vision, Aurelia and Vanessa easily captured a strange thing that was glowing red at the far end of the passage. It was hard to describe what it was. It was about the size of a dwarf and also had short limbs, except that its chest was extremely small, and its head was enormous. Of course, the so-called head was a red light that repeatedly scanned the surroundings. Duque raised his thumb and pointed at the thing in the distance. It's a mobile alarm system, commonly known as the Yao Yao Spirit. Of course, This thing is no threat to us. But, Vanessa, sneak over and see if it can detect you. Duque turned to Aurelia. As for you, please set up a few freezing traps in the direction of the Yao Yao spirit. Freezing trap. Any monster that steps on the trap will instantly turn into a huge block of ice. It will be immobilized for a short time. It was a skill that almost all hunters and rangers knew. Vanessa and Aurelia nodded and did as he said. 30 seconds later, Vanessa arrived in front of the so-called monster spirit. Stealth was a rogue skill that surpassed physical techniques. It could use the rogue profession's unique focus energy to distort the light around the body to achieve an effect that was invisible to the naked eye. Vanessa was very young, but no one could deny her outstanding talent as a rogue. She was very confident that no one would be able to detect her unless she was very close to a hunter or ranger who specialized in anti-stealth. She was wrong. Just as she was about to walk past the Yao Yao spirit and sneak, the strange iron lump suddenly made a sharp sound. Intruder! Intruder! Chapter 361. Not only did the huge red lamp shine brightly, but there was also a sharp noise. In the next moment, several huge metal objects dashed towards them. Vanessa wanted to use sprint while in stealth to move quickly and leave this weird thing. Who knew that Yao Yao's arm would shoot out a flashing flare, illuminating everything within a few meters as if it was daytime. It directly broke Vanessa's invisibility. Ah! Little Vanessa finally cried out in shock. The metal creatures charged at them too, but they all stepped into Aurelia's trap and turned into large chunks of ice. At that moment, Duque shot a frost arrow and froze the Yao Yao into a large block of ice. Immediately, the huge steel tunnel returned to peace. The shock on Vanessa's face had yet to fade. Clearly, she couldn't accept that her stealth had been broken by such a weird thing. Duque asked Aurelia with a smile. How does little Vanessa's stealth compare to that of the trolls? At least better than 80% of trolls. That's enough. Enough? Enough, Duque said with absolute certainty. Sniffing the air, Aurelia pointed to the end of the tunnel. There seems to be a guy who can be called boss over there. Duque smiled. Whatever. That's not my goal. Duque walked over and unfroze the Yao Yao. Then, he stayed where he was and guided the nimble Vanessa to dismantle the mobile alarm robot. A bunch of data appeared on Duque's retina. You've obtained the preliminary blueprints for the mobile alarm system. Actually, that wasn't entirely true. As an engineering student who dabbled in construction equipment, Duque had already figured out most of the structure of this ling. All in all, the gnome was really a genius. He had actually used the technology of the Steam Age to play with automatic control technology. That crazy enemy tracking system was actually capable of sensing vibrations and heat. This was simply beyond the limitations of the times of Tesla, Edison, and Einstein. Of course, it wasn't that the Yao Yao's technology was so advanced. Instead, the gnomes had used a lot of simple, violent, and miraculous devices when they designed this thing. For example, this vibration sensor was similar to the ancient seismograph from before Duque's transmigration, but it was more sophisticated. It was actually using the gear to sense the vibration between every step it took. In that short interval, no one would have realized that it was actually sensing the vibrations within a radius of tens of meters in a stationary state. Once there was a vibration, it would enter the next stage. I tested it with a heat-sensing stone. When it passed through again, it would automatically fire a flare in the direction of the heat source to further confirm whether the target was invisible or in a hidden state. The 3 types of confirmations ensured that there would be no mistake. Finally, there was the crazy high-frequency horn alarm. On top of that, it had an unscientific power system that leaned towards magic. A mobile alarm system, robot appeared. Duque did not go to the final boss. It was not easy to clear out Gnomerigan. In addition to clearing out the traitor of the gnomes, he also had to block all the cracks between the rocks and clean up the weak radiation. Duque didn't have the spare time to do this. So, Duque took the 2 girls directly to the engineering laboratory. A day later, Duque returned to his private army and brought back a large number of the latest models of the goblins. System Elf, are you sure there's no problem with this thing? Duque had deep dark circles under his eyes and looked tired. But it was worth it for the sake of the 30,000 soldiers. Dear host, I'm very sure. All the gravity sensors have been set to 150 kilograms. Only humanoid creatures that exceed this weight will trigger the alarm. And according to the host's habit, I've set the most prominent warning sound for the goblins. That's good. Duque almost emptied the entire engineering laboratory of Gnomerigan. McNeil, the great traitor who betrayed the great craftsman and all the gnomes, would probably go crazy on the spot if he found out. So, after Duque gave some instructions, the army set off again. Few people knew that there was actually an engineering laboratory on the 4th floor of Gnomerigan. No one would know what Duque had done in that laboratory. Then he moved the things in the laboratory to Karazhan. The soldiers of Stormwind looked curiously at a bunch of strange machines with bark on their heads running around the army. Tick-tock made a strange noise. Then, it didn't seem to have any effect until that night. Windsor was puzzled by Duque's arrangement. Duque only left the minimum number of sentries, and instead deployed at least 200 rapid response troops. It was a cavalry unit that was forbidden to sleep all night. Their equipment was also very strange. Lassos with steel wires? Long-handled axes that were rarely used by cavalry? What the hell was that? Well, I've been a soldier for so many years. I've been at war for almost 2 years. This is the first time I've heard such a strange order. We're supposed to kill trolls after hearing the alarm in the middle of the night, preferably alive? I heard that trolls will heal themselves after a while, unless their heads are cut off or their hearts are pierced. Yes, there are basically no trolls near the Elven Forest. There are only a few occasionally near the Night Forest. But trolls are the norm in the Rotterdam continent, right? What's the alarm? None of the cavalrymen knew. As night fell, they quickly found out what the alarm was. Suddenly, in the darkness of the night, they heard a peerlessly mournful cry for help. Help! Murder! These guys are going to tear me apart. Every cavalryman had the word embarrassment written all over their faces. If it was a living person who shouted, there would be no problem. The problem was that the voice was obviously mechanical and electronic. Since it was an order from above, the cavalrymen quickly set off. When they arrived, they found a strange, flashing red demon spirit, being chased by 2 trolls. Come and save me. There's someone acting cool here. We can't hold on any longer. Shouting incomprehensible words, the robot tried to run with its short legs. Originally, it could not outrun the trolls, but when the trolls saw the cavalrymen, they immediately ran back. Chasing a master of concealment troll in the dark was a very scary thing. They could be killed at any time. At this moment, the cavalrymen laughed. They did not know what kind of special paint was sprayed on the troll's body. Even in the darkness of the night, it was still extremely eye-catching. The trolls seemed to want to wipe it off, but the more they did, the bigger the lump became. After 2 ordinary troll scouts lost their concealment, was there any suspense in facing an aggressive squadron of cavalrymen? The next morning, the entire army saw the spoils of war from the Rapid Reaction Force. Chapter 362. Troll. Fresh out of the oven, a cute and lively troll. If you dare to go in and fight with your bare hands, the troll will definitely tear you apart. Silver scale breastplate, 5 pieces. In the army, the logistics camp was in chaos. A group of Stormwind soldiers, who had never seen a troll before, fought to see the captured troll. There were all kinds of people in the camp. Windsor saw that they weren't doing well, and taught them a good lesson. As more and more troll were captured, many soldiers who had lived in the relatively peaceful Elven Forest for their entire lives saw a troll for the first time. A veteran who had experienced at least 5 battles, and was now a 2nd lieutenant of the Alliance, held a dagger and directly cut off one of the troll's fingers. Then he fed a piece of meat to the troll, and pointed at the finger that had already begun to regenerate, explaining in a loud voice. Do you see that? This is your new enemy, the troll. The 2nd lieutenant grabbed the troll that had tried to bite him by the hair, letting every soldier who got close to the troll see clearly. Our ancestors have fought with these guys for generations. You were lucky to grow up in a relatively peaceful environment, but Stormwind City has fallen. However, Stormwind City has fallen, and the orcs who attacked our home have joined forces with the trolls who once fought a bloody battle with our ancestors. Now they're all tribes. Greenskin plus greenskin, they're all F***king bad things. But that's not important. You just need to understand your enemy's weakness. The second lieutenant demonstrated how to slit the troll's throat. Wah! Almost everyone thought that the troll was dead for sure. But even though it was vomiting blood, even though it looked very wretched, everyone was shocked to find that the troll's throat was healing on its own. The blood it spat out decreased, and in the end, it even had the strength to curse in the troll language. Such a miraculous scene scared many people. Holy light above, are these evil creatures immortal? A soldier asked, trembling. Don't be silly. There are no creatures in this world that can't be killed. You can't kill it because you haven't found a way. With that, the second lieutenant stabbed the troll's heart. In the next 10 seconds, the troll struggled fiercely. Then its legs gave way and it died. Oh. The soldiers finally let out sighs of relief. Giant demons are hard to kill, but they are not truly unkillable. He would die if his heart was pierced, and he would die if his head was cut off. Due to its powerful regenerative ability, unless you can guarantee your own safety and leave the sharp weapon in its heart for more than 10 seconds, it is highly recommended that you deal with its brain. It was fine to pierce their heads with a spear, or chop them off with a sword. Clean and efficient, leaving no trouble. That was the scene in full swing. Aurelia followed Duque to inspect the camp. Wherever Duque went, there would be loud cheers. Sir Marcus, we agreed to take us back this time as well. Lord Marcus. When the orcs. Aurelia was surprised. I've never seen a troop with such a strange morale. Duque turned his head. Why is it strange? Because of my request. I want them to use a mere 30,000 people to chase after over 100,000 tribes. It's very likely that it will end in total annihilation. Why doesn't anyone feel fear or despair? Aurelia bit her lip. After her initial craziness for the sake of Kuel Salis passed, she began to realize more and more how difficult it was for Duque, as well as how much courage and boldness it took to send 30,000 elites to chase after the tribes. Aurelia felt very apologetic. Duque very naturally put his hand on Aurelia's shoulder and pointed to the warriors who were practicing and listening to lectures in full swing. Do you know why no one is afraid? Because the scene before them gives the warriors of Stormwind a strange sense of familiarity. They feel that they have stepped into victory mode again. Victory mode. Aurelia didn't realize how close her face was to Duque. Yes. That is, I first prepare them mentally. Then, when they face an enemy that they know very well, they won't have any fear. That's right. The unknown is always frightening. When you thoroughly understand everything about the enemy, the ferocity and terror will only be a conversation topic after a meal, rather than a heavy psychological pressure. Duque used Nagas as instructors to train batches of Stormwind warriors. Facts have repeatedly proven Duque's wisdom and foresight. Sir Marcus is our god of prophecy. He will always lead us to victory. In any case, a commander who can play with the enemy leader is more reassuring than an idiot leading us. Aurelia's long ears heard almost deified worship and trust in Duque. For some reason, Aurelia felt sweet in her heart. Was it because of a moment of curiosity that I created the birth of a legend? Or is this fate? Thinking of the hardship she suffered for Duque, and thinking of how much Duque has done for her now, when her hometown is safe, how should she face Duque? For a moment, Aurelia's heart was in chaos. At this moment, Duque mischievously blew into Aurelia's long ears. Realizing that Duque was playing with her, Aurelia had the heart to bite Duque to death. If there were not many people watching, Aurelia swore that she would definitely teach Duque a lesson. What are you thinking about? Thinking, when is this damn war going to end? Within this year. Duque said with absolute certainty, when the Battle of Kuel Salis is over, I will tell you my inference. Inference, another inference. Obviously, it was only a judgment based on intelligence, but Aurelia felt that she was fighting with a god of fate. Incomparably relieved. Okay, I believe you. When Duke easily broke through the encirclement of the troll scouts and faintly created pressure, Everyone felt that the trolls were only SOSO after all. On this day, Duque's army marched for a full 80 kilometers. Even though this was Rotterdam's territory, and even though the roads were easy to travel on, it was still an unbelievable thing. When Orgrim learned that Duque's army was only 50 kilometers away, he gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. That night, Orgrim organized a fierce counterattack. He was prepared to let the entire tribe go out and get rid of Duque first. However, when the tribe ran for 20 kilometers, they saw red light all over the mountains and plains. Help! Orgrim night attack! A group of strange metallic humanoids screamed. Chapter 363. It turned out that the great tribal chief could instantly create so many blue veins on his forehead. Orgrim grabbed Zujin with one hand. Didn't you say that the trolls are the kings of the forest? Is there nothing in the forest that can escape your men's detection? Then what is this? Orgrim roared angrily, his saliva almost drenching Zujin's face cloth. Zujin was speechless as he followed Orgrim's finger. Half a quarter of an hour ago, his most trusted scout had reported to him that the road ahead was unimpeded. There were no traps, no enemies, and there were no sentries within 3 kilometers of the enemy. A while ago, many troll scouts who got too close to the human camp were caught. Zujin had always thought that it was because they got too close to the humans' magic traps. Just like the thousands of years of war between the trolls and the elves, the trolls still couldn't figure out the uses of the long-eared magic. The only two things the trolls could rely on were their numbers and strong vitality. Now it was clear that this was beyond the scope of magic. The red light that symbolized an alarm stretched from the horizon to the horizon. These strange metal creatures were shouting and yelling. The noise was so loud that it could even wake up a bear in the east. Now the horde had two choices. The first was to retreat, but this would hurt their morale. The second was to continue running and kill their way into the human camp within 2 hours. As long as they could stick to the humans, even if there was a loss of stamina, Orgrim firmly believed that his 100,000 beastmen and trolls could easily destroy this annoying tail. Gul'dan, I need you to contact Zuluhid. Orgrim ordered the evil warlock king not far from him. Gul'dan's face was filled with humility. Yes, great tribal chief. His wrinkled fingers drew a few runes that flowed with evil energy in the air. Along the mirror that appeared in the air, Orgrim saw his deputy. In the image, a strong gust of wind blew in the air. It was Zuluhid and his adult red dragon mount. Feeling the uncomfortable spiritual connection, Zuluhid frowned, but he still took the initiative to speak. Great tribal chief, the humans seem to have received the alarm, but they don't seem to be afraid of our attack. Or perhaps, they don't know how many of us are attacking. They sent less than 100 horsemen out of camp. But that long-eared powerhouse seems to be in the camp. I saw a wyvern cavalryman who got too close get shot to death. At this moment, Zujin suddenly came to a realization. That's right. The humans have never used more than 200 scouts to capture me. The thing they use to alert us seems to be able to spray something that we can't wash off and stick to the troll's body. It's something that can be seen clearly in the dark. Orgrim thought of many things in an instant. He didn't understand this new thing called humans. Looking at the alarms all over the mountains and plains emitting the same light, listening to them repeat the same monotonous sentence, Orgrim quickly got over the initial shock. Keep going. Get me one of those things. Zujin's figure disappeared. Even if he didn't fully acknowledge Orgrim's dominance, it was obvious that the troll had made a mistake this time. In less than 3 minutes, Zujin returned with a struggling metal object with a red glow on its head that looked like a living creature. Orgrim simply and violently smashed the thing with his hammer. Zujin was dumbfounded by his actions. I should have just smashed it and brought it over. No, there's a difference. If that's the case, I don't know if you brought all the parts. Orgrim carefully looked at the things on the wreckage, but he quickly felt a sense of displeasure at being fooled. Most of them were parts that he couldn't understand. Some were round, some were long, some had teeth, and there were even a few crystals that contained magical energy. Gul'dan, can you sense any mysterious, communicative things? No, chief. Gul'dan shook his head humbly. I can only sense things like totem poles that react when they come within a certain range. It was a passive sensing device. The chief's displeasure became even more obvious. In Orgrim's eyes, these things of the humans were like giant dwarven machines. They looked good but were useless and looked scary. But in reality, they could still be dealt with hammers and axes. In the end, this was no different from the simple traps that the beastmen used for hunting. It was like tying a bell on a string. If an idiot stepped on the string, the bell would immediately ring. Full speed attack. Orgrim raised the doomhammer, in his hand up high. 30 kilometers away, Aurelia stared at the wyvern that was hovering above the horizon. Will Orgrim fall for it? Aurelia asked Duque softly as she looked lovingly at her exhausted sister who was resting on a bed. He will. Duque's face was full of confidence. Then the two of them looked at the huge but empty camp. There were many humanoid creatures in the camp, but they were all scarecrows wearing armor. There were only 3,000 cavalrymen that actually traveled 80 kilometers in a day, but 1 man, 2 horses, and a large number of carriages carrying supplies. They used 3,000 people to create a huge camp that could accommodate 30,000 people. There were cauldrons boiling soup, chefs distributing black bread, and patrolling soldiers. It looked no different from an army. Only their own people knew that the soldiers were only pretending when the wyverns got a little closer. Even if they were the elites of Stormwind, the soldiers were exhausted. In fact, the main force was still 50 kilometers away. A smug smile appeared on Duke's face. The horde was getting closer. Duque's horde faithfully sent back all kinds of information. Other than the old, mobile alarm system, robots from Nomarigan that were smashed by Orgrim at the beginning, all the robots within 20 kilometers were Duque's modified versions. Of course, not every horde was a high-end robot. Duque installed a simple control system that evolved from Morse code. Not all of the monsters revealed their faces. Most of them disguised themselves as small trees and fixed themselves in important positions as a passive enemy-seeking system. Although it was simple, it was enough for the system elf to summarize all the messages and calculate the number of horde that had reached a certain area. Close. Close. Even closer. When the horde's army finally appeared on the horizon and began to charge, Duque waited until the horde was 2 kilometers away before he waved his hand, and the 3,000 cavalrymen quickly ran away. Orgrim was about to go crazy with anger. Even though Duque's army was right under his nose, it felt like he was raising his hammer and preparing for close combat while Duque ran into the range of the javelin. He raised his javelin and ran into the range of the catapult. When he pulled the catapult, the enemy was already so far away that he could only see the dust behind them. The chief almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 364. Money could not buy one's foresight. There was no medicine for regret in this world. Seeing Duque's men leave so quickly, Orgrim was filled with regret. Along the way, he had forced a group of warlike orcs to submit to him, and only then was he able to sneak, until now. While the demonic blood gave the orcs great strength and physique, it also increased their warlike nature to the extreme. This was a group of rebellious subordinates. To maintain the orcs' bloodthirst and desire for destruction, the tribe had to pay a high price. If Duque accepted the challenge, even if the tribe lost, Orgrim could still mediate. Now Duque's army was as slippery as a loach. If they did not fight, Orgrim could not do anything to Duque. Duque was clearly trying to drag the tribe to death. Now that the orcs and trolls had just joined forces, there were many conflicts that had not been resolved. In order to unite different forces and races, apart from having a common goal and non-conflicting interests, the most important factor was victory. Any new organization needed to be nourished by victory and success in order to grow. The reason why Duque could quickly gain such a high reputation in the alliance was because Duque was the ever-victorious marshal. Orgrim could not make a promise to the trolls, and then delay attacking the elves. On the contrary, the longer he delayed, the better it was for the alliance. From the holy city of Stratholme to the east, it was basically barren land. Even if the tribe turned the sky upside down here, it would not affect Rotterdam too much. Moreover, once the hinterlands was cleared, Duque would receive 20,000 elite human soldiers and an entire Wormhammer Dwarf Griffin aeronauts as support. That was what Duque was using. Unfortunately, while Duque's calculations were accurate, Orgrim was even more ruthless. Looking at the empty human camp, every orc warrior's face was filled with anger and indignation. On the contrary, most of the trolls' eyes were filled with disdain and slight mockery. Orgrim yelled, "Everyone, do you see that? These are the cunning humans. Humans who never dared to fight the brave orcs head-on. Despicable, cowardly, shameless, lowly. But they played a trick on the brave orcs. Can we take this lying down? No. Never. Absolutely not." Tens of thousands of orcs roared and raised the weapons in their hands to vent the anger in their hearts. "I need a brave general to carry out a very dangerous, destructive mission for the tribe. Who's coming?" Immediately, more than 10 generals stepped forward. However, Orgrim eventually chose Nogar, Noggle the Flesh Shredder. This was a general from the Warsong clan who was famous for his bravery and ruthlessness. When he crossed over to the world of Azeroth, he was just an insignificant pawn. Now he was a general. Where did his martial merit come from? Asked the human warriors that he had torn into pieces. In his hands, he had torn at least 3 champion knights apart. These warriors of the human world had become a part of his terrifying legend. Orgrim opened the detailed map he obtained from the humans. "I need you to select 10,000 of your most violent beastmen warriors to destroy this place and this place. Then they will meet up with us here. Can you do it?" Noggle's eyes shone with a bloodthirsty light. "No problem, great chief." The next morning, Duque smiled bitterly. The Horde had the upper hand, so they had the right to divide their forces. 10,000 beastmen was not a lot, but it was not a small number either. If they went all out, Duque's army of 30,000 would have to change their route. But they could not ignore it either. This was because Orgrim clearly had Duque in his hands, or rather, the Alliance's weakness. After all, the Alliance was a coalition of different kingdoms. The Alliance was not like the Horde, where the Great Chief had a clear relationship with the chiefs of the various clans. The Alliance, especially the current Alliance, had to take care of the interests of the various kingdoms and the feelings of the people. Now, that division was directly behind Duque's army of 30,000, heading straight for Darrowshire in the south of Stratholme. In addition, an independent team was heading for Maris Farm to destroy Lordaeron's food production. When King Tyrrhenas heard this news, he almost peed his pants. Another 3 magic messages were sent within an hour. Duque was extremely annoyed. Why didn't the magic message blacklist me? Duque rubbed his forehead. After some thought, Duque put up a mental barrier. Now, no matter who sent a magic message, Duque would not be able to receive it. He also gave the System Elf a mission to develop a magic version of the blacklist. In the end, Duque decided to scare Tyrrhenas. Based on my analysis of the situation, the main force of the Horde is preparing to attack Stratholme. So, I can only focus on the Holy City and temporarily give up on attacking the Horde. Duque lied through his teeth. Lucia, who was in charge of sending the messages for Duque, rolled her eyes, but still did it. No ordinary person would dare to bear the political pressure of the leader of the Alliance. One could imagine how much trouble and criticism Duque would face after this. "Send my order. Evacuate all the people in the entire area, including Darrowshire, and have them hide in Caer Darrowshire or Stratholme. Send my order. Let Seamus clean up the remaining enemies in the hinterlands, and build a fortress in the north." This was all for Hercule Salas. The price was that most of the cities in the area, except for Stratholme, would be burned to the ground. Aurelia pursed her lips and held Duque's hand tightly. It was the 18th of May. On this day, the main force of the Horde finally left the human territory and entered Cule Salas. "Be quiet, or die," Zujin warned his men sternly. They were quickly passing through the forest and entering Cule Salas. Even though they had not yet reached the damned forest with the protection of magic, Zujin did not mind having an appetizer. His sharp senses were warning him that the elf was not far ahead. He slowed down and nimbly took each step on the tree. Zujin's movements were so silent that it was hard to imagine that he was a troll over 2 meters tall. His huge and slightly slender body had an unimaginable softness and agility. Zhu Jin did not even touch a single leaf or twig. He held the axe, which was infused with the beast war spirit, with both of his hands as he lightly flew from tree to tree. He did not want the elves to know that they were coming, at least not now. Together with the Amani trolls around him, he silently watched as a team of 20 elven border patrols walked into their ambush. Chapter 365. The trolls who were almost at the top of the tree silently readied their weapons. Most of them revealed their sharp triangular teeth, revealing a sinister smile. This was a grudge that had lasted for thousands of years. To the trolls, ever since this pale-skinned, pointy-eared intruder first set foot on this continent 6,800 years ago, they had been stealing territory from the Great Amani Empire. They gradually seized control of this land. They had the speed, stealthiness, and even agility of trolls. These elves also had many powerful advantages, the most powerful of which was their damned magic. The trolls had never come into contact with magic before, so they had no way of fighting back against those mysterious attacks or breaking through their arcane defenses. The only thing they could do was to use their high-speed regeneration of flesh and blood, their advantage in numbers, and their lives to suppress these hateful elves. The trolls had once succeeded. Their ancestors had used their blood to create epic troll weapons, using up the last drop of magic in the elven bloodline, and almost completely annihilated these weak fellows. But 2,000 years ago, the elves and the despicable humans formed an alliance. These two pale-skinned races completely destroyed the Amani Empire. They took down fortresses, burned castles, burned the Amani Empire's cultural essence to the ground, and slaughtered tens of thousands of their fellow trolls. The once ruler of the planet, the Great Amani Empire, was shattered, and no longer had its former glory. All that was left was the shadow of thousands of years of continuous defeats, like maggots in a bone, entangling the souls of every troll. The trolls were no longer able to restore their glory, and take back everything that belonged to them. Until now, the appearance of the horde gave them hope for revenge. Zhu Jin was willing to believe in them. Orgrim Doomhammer, a bold and wise leader of the horde, promised to help them rebuild the Amani Empire. In fact, when the humans and orcs started the war, Zhu Jin had tried to reunite the trolls of the various tribes. Amani Fire Tree, Rotten Moss, Evil Tooth, Evil Branch, Burning Bramble, Deadwood. These forest troll tribes that had been divided for countless generations, and had long become enemies and hated each other, had for the first time found common ground in the face of a greater and more glorious goal. One by one, Zhu Jin challenged and defeated the leaders of these clans, whether it was through battles, competitions, or something else. All of them had already knelt before him. They and their tribes would all listen to his commands. The forest trolls banded together once more. Apart from that, the Frostmane clan and the other Frost Troll clans that had lost their territories to the Bronzebeard dwarves had also joined the army of revenge. With the help of the tribe, they would clean up the world in a similar way as the humans and elves, and then regain control of the forest. The orcs showed no interest in the forest at all. Zhu Jin suspected that they would occupy the valleys and plains of this world. Let the orcs go. But the trolls only wanted the forest. Standing on the tree, Zhu Jin's sinister smile widened as he looked down at the elves who didn't know that they had stepped into the gates of hell. Zhu Jin, who had also grown up immersed in the mud of hatred and revenge, completely understood the feelings of his compatriots. They had already infiltrated deep into the elves' homeland, and were preparing to slaughter the elves on the land that they had stolen from their hands. The land that the elves believed to be their homeland and incomparably safe. Let the elves taste the feeling of losing their homes and being slaughtered. Suddenly, the sound of wind breaking overhead alerted some of the patrolling elves. It was already too late. The trolls weren't known for their strength, but that was relative to the orcs. In this environment where they would have to fight at close quarters in less than 2 seconds, the weakness of the elves' lack of individual combat ability was magnified many times over. Zhu Jin jumped down from the tree, and his huge feet landed right on top of the heads of 2 elves. The huge weight and the acceleration of gravity easily broke the necks of the 2 elves. Before his feet even touched the ground of the forest, Zhu Jin threw out his axe with a strange technique. The sharp giant axe, spinning in midair, easily flew between the two elves. Before they could react, the spinning blade of the axe had already sliced open the throat of the elf who was facing Zhu Jin. In less than half a second, the axe cut deeply into the head of the elf who was slightly further back. The other axe did the same. The speed at which it fell was almost as fast as the two elves who had been trampled to death by Zhu Jin. The remaining 4 elves lost their lives and collapsed, their blood splattering on the leaves of the forest grass. It was a ghastly sight. Before they could even scream, the rest of the elves were also taken care of by the trolls who descended from the sky like lightning. Zhu Jin was very satisfied with this ambush that was like an appetizer. Cut off their heads and hang them up. If there's a chance, tell the elves that the trolls are coming. On all fronts in the southern part of the Longsong Forest, the trolls attacked the elven patrols in a frenzy. Some troll armies easily won, while others paid a heavy price. What? You're saying that some of the elves predicted our arrival and made arrangements to surround and kill us? Zhu Jin was very confused by his subordinate's report. If this was a battle where the trolls were warned from above, then the trolls' losses would undoubtedly be much greater. Unfortunately, the trolls only suffered a crushing defeat in less than a fifth of the area. The rest were overwhelming victories. Whatever, we'll leave the rest to the orcs. Let's see if Orgrim can break through those damned elven defensive spells like he promised. What are you doing? When Gul'dan approached Orgrim, the great chief barked out a warning question. There are some things that you should see for yourself, Great Doomhammer. Gul'dan bowed deeply. Orgrim nodded and put the hammer on his shoulder, indicating for Gul'dan to lead the way. Gul'dan turned around and led Doomhammer and his personal guards back. Soon, they arrived in front of a large pit that had been dug out. At the bottom of the pit was a large stone, and the rough surface of the stone had countless intricate runes drawn on it. Those strokes were definitely the work of a clever creature. But that wasn't the point. Even someone like Doomhammer, who knew nothing about mystical abilities and spiritual power, could feel the energy emanating from this heavy stone. This is the elven trap? Orgrim asked. Yes, and it's not just a trap. Chapter 366. Gul'dan stroked his beard and replied. This thing is filled with energy. I believe that these runestones and the other runestones at the edge of the forest are evenly distributed here, forming a large magic trap and barrier. What barrier? They didn't stop us or cause any damage, Orgrim pointed out. No, because we're only using our bodies to enter the forest and use normal weapons, Gul'dan replied. I believe that these runestones restrict the use of magic. It's very likely that only the elves can cast their spells in this area. I've tried to cast some spells here before, but they all failed. If I retreat 10 steps to the other side of the mountain, I can cast spells again. Orgrim was solemn. This was no laughing matter. He clearly remembered how destructive human magic was. If it wasn't for the Beastman warlocks suppressing the human mages, the Beastmen would have had to pay a heavy price to defeat the humans. This was why he didn't exterminate the Shadow Council that he hated so much. Human magic originated from the elves. He knew how powerful Gul'dan was. Even after he was injured, Gul'dan's magic was still the strongest among the Beastmen. The battle against the humans' strongest mage, Antonidas, in Southshore proved Gul'dan's strength. Yet Gul'dan told himself that his magic couldn't be used. What about the trap? It seems to be able to draw out the powerful force hidden in the forest, as long as those long ears want it. Boom. Gul'dan grinned, his mouth making sounds as if he was about to explode. How many can it deal with at once? Gul'dan laughed sinisterly as he raised 5 fingers. 5,000? Orgrim probed. 50,000, and as long as it's within the range of the rune, as long as it's densely packed, killing 10,000 trolls isn't a problem. The great chief immediately recalled the day Stormwind City was conquered, where thousands of Beastman warriors were burned to death in the flames. Even though the Blackrock tribe Beastmen had a certain level of fire resistance, they weren't immune to fire. If the fire was big enough, they would still be injured and die. After Orgrim knew the answer, he jumped in fright and simply raised his hammer. His meaning was very clear. Is there any way to destroy it? No, this is too wasteful. I can turn it into a storm altar and use the power of the runestone to strengthen creatures. Gul'dan's hunchbacked body gave off an evil aura. No orcs will participate in your strengthening, the great chieftain refused sharply. They have indeed become stronger. Orgrim stared at Gul'dan, his eyes filled with killing intent. Stronger, greener, less intelligent and more violent. Gul'dan lowered his head. He did not plan to openly oppose the great chief at this time. I plan to strengthen the ogres. Perhaps there will be some changes in their bodies. But that has nothing to do with the orcs. It had nothing to do with him, so he let it go. Feeling that the loss of the tribe's elites would cause their fighting power to drop, Orgrim agreed. Just like how he agreed to let the dead humans become Death Knights to join the tribe. The preparations went smoothly and took a lot of time. Initially, Orgrim thought that Zujin would be impatient. Unexpectedly, Zujin said, "My ancestors spent hundreds of years and still couldn't break this barrier. I don't mind waiting a few days or months as long as I can break it. The trolls can wait." After saying this, Zujin ran off to kill the elven patrols outside. After Gul'dan used his evil dark magic and rituals to break the outermost layer of the runestone's protection, he ordered Gugul, the twin-headed ogre hero, to carefully and orderly dismantle this giant runestone. This was a highly skilled and physically demanding job. If he used brute force to dismantle it, the result would be obvious. A certain clumsy ogre activated the protection on the runestone, but what happened? The unlucky ogre was blasted 30 meters into the air. Then, his entire body broke into tens of thousands of pieces that were evenly scattered over an area of 100 square meters. Even if the ogre's mother came here, she would not be able to recognize that this was her child. It took them a full 8 hours to completely dig out this runestone. Fortunately, Orgrim had brought some elites and the trolls as the vanguard here first. Otherwise, he could only let the army of 100,000 wait. Now the army of 100,000 was still advancing 60 kilometers away. On the other side, Gugul skillfully smashed the giant runestone into a few large pieces. He brought 5 of the pieces to the clearing and spent a few more hours correcting the shape of the runestone. He placed it in the correct shape of a 5-pointed star on the clearing above the energy vein of the forest. "Is everything ready?" Gul'dan asked impatiently. Not far away, both of Gugul's heads shook their heads. The giant ogre grunted like a pig. He carried the last piece of the runestone, which weighed at least 5 tons, with his strong and explosive arms. "It's done now," he shouted, rubbing his shoulder with one hand. Gul'dan finally nodded in satisfaction. He could not imagine how he would handle the runestone, which was the size of a small mountain, without enough manpower. The runestone was huge, heavy, and had a strange center of gravity deviation. 2 ogres could lift it, but it would require at least a dozen orcs to do it. Orgrim hated magic, and would never let the noble orcs do such a dangerous thing. Fortunately, the great chief allowed Gul'dan to use some ogres to do it, and Gugul could command his stupid one-headed orcs more easily than any other orc. Yes, when faced with a bunch of muscular retards, it did not matter if you were a world-class intellectual or not, you would still go crazy. Gul'dan could calculate how the elves moved the runestones to their original positions the first time. That had nothing to do with magic. Magic was powerful, but compared to the energy needed to lift 100 kilograms of weight with magic, it was better to use slaves. Forest trolls were about as strong as ogres, but they were much smarter, and they would listen to specific commands. However, the elves did not have the habit of keeping forest troll slaves for long periods of time. The runestone was finally placed in the correct position. Even Gul'dan could not find any fault with it. Gul'dan waved his hand, and the 5 orc warlocks each chose one of the runestone and stood beside it. Fortunately, Orgrim's brain is only filled with schemes and muscles, and he did not kill all of my men. Otherwise, they would not have been able to complete this ritual. Chapter 367. Just like before, while Gul'dan believed that he would succeed, he wasn't completely sure. However, as an evil warlock with an unparalleled spirit of exploration, there was nothing he couldn't sacrifice. Furthermore, Gul'dan believed that if he failed, he would survive unscathed. Let's begin. He nodded to Kurger, who was shouting at the assembled ogres. He was recruiting lab rats. After some pushing and shoving, grunting and cursing, the weakest of the ogres walked forward. Of course, no matter how weak he was still several times heavier and twice as tall as a human. Google shouted an order at the ogre. The ogre looked like he was ready to die a martyr, shrugging his shoulders as he walked into the empty space in the middle of the stones. He stood in the middle of the pentagram and waited, not moving. One of the strengths of the ogres was that they would stand firmly after being asked to. If not for another order or to find food, an ogre could stand there for hours, not moving an inch like a marble statue. Gul'dan often felt that these fellows had evolved from stones. This could also explain their thick skin that could easily block blades, as well as their ridiculously low intelligence. If Gul'dan ordered them to move forward, they would first spend a few seconds thinking about their demon life, perhaps thinking about the human delicacy they ate the night before drooling. Then they would randomly choose a direction to move forward, killing everything they didn't like along the way. Sometimes this included their own kind or their master. If he had a choice, Gul'dan definitely wouldn't order these idiots around without Gul'dan's permission. With Google around, at least these idiots would walk in the right direction, and they wouldn't have to worry about hurting their own people. Of course, efficiency was still a mystery. Sometimes they could contemplate life while being stabbed in the thigh with a knife. Only with the twin-headed ogre around would their efficiency reach a passable standard. Gul'dan's thoughts returned to the present. He raised his arm and began to resonate with the dark energy that the Burning Legion's vice leader, Kil'jaeden, had bestowed upon him in Draenor. The evil power tore through the plane and crossed through space, pouring into Gul'dan's body. As a medium, he immediately split it into 5, sending it to the soul crystals in front of the 5 warlocks' chests, and then into the runestones in front of them. The stench, decay, and depravity were corroding the arcana power that originated from nature. This was not without cost. The origin of nature instinctively resisted the corrosion and invasion. A dazzling radiance burst forth from the depths of the earth, and was directly transmitted to the runestone. The energy visible to the naked eye fiercely attacked the 5 warlocks who attempted to pollute the runestone. The power of the counterattack was so violent that the skull staff of the warlock standing in the south cracked on the spot. Less than half a second after the stench and filthy death aura flowed out, the power of the earth seemed to have found a vent and suddenly attacked the warlock. The unlucky ones with insufficient strength were always the first to suffer. The power of nature crashed into that guy's body like a raging wave. One could see that there were unknown plants growing out of every pore on his arms. Trash! Gul'dan spat. Without needing his reminder, Gujar grabbed the dead warlock and took his place. 3 seconds later, Gul'dan had to do the same thing as the 2-headed ogre magician. This helpless feeling of having to personally take the field made Gul'dan very unhappy. Fortunately, the remaining 3 fellas were clearly a cut above the 2 dead men from before. Now, the 5 pharaoh each chose a stone in front of them and poured dark energy into it. When all the rune lines on the 5 runestones were filled with black light and vibrated, Gul'dan focused his mind and chanted a short incantation. Every note of the evil spell contained a taboo smell of blood, which made Orgrim, who was watching from the side, very uncomfortable. The great tribal chief frowned. Unfortunately, he had no other choice. Shamans were not good at breaking through enemies' magic defenses, and the only powerful shaman under him was Zuluhid, whose strength was clearly 2 levels lower than Gul'dan's. More dark energy flowed through Gul'dan's wrinkled skin, and into his runestone from his scarlet fingertips. But this time, it wasn't just a simple injection of energy. The overflowing demonic aura turned into a black comet, passing through the stone on his left at high speed before jumping towards the stone on his right. The demon's power did not stop there. It continued to move to the near left, then to the far right, and finally returned to the stone in front of him. A glowing pentagram connected all 5 stones. Wherever the black comet passed, it would quickly turn black. There would no longer be any signs of life. Countless complicated runes would appear on the ground. In the next moment, the sky above the altar suddenly darkened. The corrosive energy shot thousands of meters into the air before exploding. Soon, A strange storm appeared in the sky. It was made up of a white tornado that moved clockwise and a black tornado that moved counterclockwise. The storm stretched from the ground to thousands of meters in the sky, and could be seen clearly from hundreds of miles away. This terrifying storm alarmed the entire area. All the high elves who were fighting the trolls were alarmed. The ogre in the pentagram was still like a statue, standing there stiffly, even though Gul'dan could see the clear fear in that fellow's eyes. Unfortunately, he was facing Gugul, a natural two-headed ogre, the absolute ruler of the ogres. No matter how afraid he was, even if Gugul wanted him to die, he had to obey. Very good. Gugul chose a good guy. Gul'dan grinned evilly. The power of the earth resonated with the sky. The power of the magic runestone was directed by Gul'dan to the ogre standing in the middle. He wasn't trembling, but his heart was trembling. A black halo enveloped him. At first, it was one circle, then countless circles. The black energy seemed to solidify as it poured onto the ogre's body. More and more energy poured onto him, finally forming a huge black sphere. The entire ogre was swallowed by this impenetrable black sphere. The immeasurable dark energy turned into a black storm, drilling into the ogre's body through every pore. Aha! The ogre finally couldn't help but scream. Moments later, the screams doubled. Two heads were screaming at the same time. Chapter 368. Gul'dan was trembling, but he was trembling in excitement from this new creation. A few minutes later, as the light gradually dissipated, the creature standing in the middle slowly revealed its true appearance. Gul'dan eagerly waited for the light to fade, so that he could see the creature that his storm altar had created. There was still an ogre standing in front of them, but there were some changes to this creature. Although it was larger than before, some of its proportions had changed. Its stomach was not as large, its arms were not as long, and its legs were not as curved, making it more agile. It also had two heads. This was definitely an unexpected surprise. No one knew better than Gul'dan what a twin-headed ogre represented. In Draenor, twin-headed ogres were very rare. They were larger and stronger than their own kind, and more coordinated. They were worshipped by all single-headed ogres, and were recognized as the supreme kings of the ogres. Gugul was one of them. No, he was even rarer. He was proven to have enough intelligence to be a mage. Gul'dan had found this twin-headed ogre when he was still young and trained him very seriously. Gugul was a reliable assistant and a powerful warlock, and he had accompanied Gul'dan to this day. Now it seemed that Gugul was no longer alone. A twin-headed ogre. And it was clear that he had high intelligence and coordination. Most importantly, this kind of ogre mage with two heads was born with the talent of casting multiple spells. He could maintain his powerful close combat abilities while also casting unparalleled spells. The power that came from the source allowed the twin-headed ogre mage to quickly recognize Gul'dan as his master. Then Gul'dan had Gugul explain to him everything he needed to know about the horde. The ogre mage listened quietly, absorbing everything like a sponge absorbing water. The birth of this mage was definitely good news for Gul'dan, who lacked soldiers. Of course, to Orgrim. These were larger and more powerful warriors. The great chief did not care that these new creatures were completely loyal to Gul'dan and not him. For a horde with such a large population, twin-headed ogres and ogre mages were just a small part of it. As long as he controlled the entire tribe, no matter what kind of thoughts the people under him had, they had to serve the tribe. Orgrim smiled and turned to leave. Because Gul'dan would complete the rest of the work, the great chief did not care how many twin-headed ogres this power could create. Orgrim's focus had always been on the bigger picture, such as the complete loyalty of the trolls. However, an accident interrupted his good mood. Something happened to Zujin. It was a premeditated ambush, a sharp arrow that almost pierced Zujin's heart. This almost ruined Orgrim's plan to bring the trolls into the new horde. Seeing the familiar emerald arrow on Zujin's chest, Orgrim raised his eyebrows. Just a centimeter more and Zujin's heart would have exploded. The entire arrow, over 60 centimeters long, pierced through Zujin's body. Moreover, the strange power contained within the arrow refused the ogre's healing ability. To make matters worse, Zulu had told the great chief that pulling it out by force might cost Zujin's life. Orgrim was very clear of Zujin's importance. Since the other troll tribes had just submitted to him, and had yet to complete the alliance between the beastmen and trolls, Zujin, who was equivalent to the great chief of the trolls, was indispensable. Orgrim gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Who did it? Aurelia? Or Servanas?" Orgrim could not remember every enemy's name, but the most outstanding ones could not be ignored. "I don't know. There were 3 very powerful female elven rangers who looked very similar to me." Zujin gritted his teeth and replied, "More accurately, there were 4 of them, but the last one was slightly weaker." 3? 4? Of course, Orgrim did not know about the Windrunner sisters. Just like how it was difficult for him to differentiate between different races. Face blindness after crossing races was a common case. "Rest well, the tribe will avenge you," Orgrim comforted Zujin. From what he saw, Zujin would need a lot of time to get rid of the mysterious green power. Who knew that Zujin would suddenly pull him back? "I saw the changes of the times, and I saw how insignificant I am. So I need power. Power of magic. Mysterious power. I heard that you used the elven runestones to make an altar." Gul'dan's altar? Orgrim had never been too interested in Gul'dan's evil magic, so he had to remind Zujin. "The latest news is that out of every 10 ogres, 3 will die during the ritual, 6 will become 2-headed ogres during the ritual, and only 1 will truly obtain the power of magic." Zujin coughed out some green blood. "Isn't it just a chance to die, grow another head, or become a deformed monster? For the sake of the troll's revenge, I have nothing to fear." Orgrim looked down on this kind of personal hatred, but he was moved by the sacrifice of the entire race. Zujin wanted to sacrifice himself, or pay some other price to obtain this kind of ethereal evil power. This was also a kind of honor. Orgrim did not refuse. "When you think it is appropriate, Gul'dan will perform the ritual for you." When Gul'dan heard this news, he grinned in joy. "Perhaps I can truly control a great demon chieftain?" An hour later, the storm altar was fully activated again. The power drawn from the sky was modified by the runestones, turning into dense dark energy that accurately hit the Troll King's chest. The dark evil aura wrapped around the green arrow in Zujin's chest. Under the tearing of this level of terrifying power, the green energy that seemed to have formed an endless cycle was easily crushed and devoured by the darkness. A large bloody hole appeared in Zujin's chest. The ritual was not over yet. Getting rid of the power that Windrunner had left in Zujin's chest was only the first step. When the other runestones poured more dark energy into Zujin's body, the Troll King's chest began to swell up. It was not just his chest. Almost every inch of Zujin's body, from his neck to his shoulders, to his arms, to his waist, to his thighs, was swelling up. More demonic power entered the wound on Zujin's chest. The wriggling bloody wound was like a huge and ferocious mouth, as if it was devouring the dark energy. Finally, a gust of dark wind burst out of Zujin's body. Chapter 369. Young man, do you want to be a magical girl? Oh. No, Zujin, do you want to be a magic troll? Trolls were actually quite adaptable. Apart from paladins, trolls could advance into almost any profession. Considering that trolls also had the bloodthirst talent of minor berserk, it was generally agreed that trolls should be hunters. Of course, for heroes the definition of professions was very vague. Just like Zujin, he was a warrior, but he had the agility of a thief. Now, with the infusion of power from the storm altar, Zujin had awakened a new profession, druid. Roar dash, this was the roar of a giant bear. The image of a giant dark bear that was as large as a small hill appeared on Zujin's back. All of the observing giant demons shuddered. Next, there was a clear cry of an eagle. The giant bear image turned into a giant eagle image with gray-brown feathers and a wingspan of over 100 meters. Zujin greedily absorbed the energy of the world, but at this moment, Gul'dan's expression was not good. Zujin's nature power was rejecting the darkness power from entering. Gul'dan could clearly feel that Zujin was merging the darkness power into his berserk bloodline. Because of the boiling blood, it weakened the darkness power. The biggest problem was that the darkness power conflicted with Zhu Jin's awakened talent. If he forcefully injected the darkness power, Zhu Jin would explode and die. Orgrim was staring at Gul'dan. Zhu Jin's subordinates were also staring at Gul'dan. For power, Zhu Jin did not fear death. But could Gul'dan let Zhu Jin die now? They had not even fought a proper battle against the elves and Zhu Jin. The only one who could control the trolls was going to die. Regardless of whether Orgrim would let Gul'dan go, the other trolls would be the first to not let him go. The trolls might even fight with the beastmen right in front of the elves. That would not be worth it. Tisk. Gul'dan lightly spat, Nagidalokasaksi. He chanted an incantation, dispelling the darkness power on the runestone. Even though it was still the power of the demon that controlled the runestone, what was being transferred to Zhu Jin was the purer nature power. Zhu Jin's body stopped expanding. It had expanded to its limit, and the blood vessels that were about to explode finally had the space to shrink back. Zhu Jin's eyes suddenly widened, and a terrifying divine light burst out from his fierce and lifelike eyes. I feel power, the power of the great bear and the eagle. It is the power of the earth. It is the power of the sky. Zhu Jin's entire body was suddenly wrapped in green light. In just half a second, Zhu Jin had turned into a huge eagle. It flapped its gigantic wings that were more than 5 meters long on one side, stirring up more than 10 tornadoes on its wings, easily blowing away all the leaves on the towering trees on the periphery of the clearing. The bare tree trunk stood out in the lush and luxuriant forest in the summer. In the next moment, Zhu Jin's body began to shrink again. It wasn't that his power had weakened, but that his power had become more condensed. It was like a retracted fist. Only when it attacked would the effect be even more frightening. Walking down the altar with large strides, Zhu Jin appeared to be even more powerful and spirited. Walking proudly in front of Orgrim, Zhu Jin knelt down on one knee for the first time. Even though the posture was rather crude and unsightly, it was still a kneel. This symbolized the true acknowledgement and submission of the great demon to the orc tribe. Orgrim's chest heaved up and down rapidly. Why did he want to attack the elves from 1,000 miles away? Of course, he knew that the elves were also targets that the tribe had to conquer or destroy. After all, the elves hadn't officially joined the war yet. It wasn't wise to rashly let a powerful opponent join them. If there were additional allies that the orcs could easily accept, or even the loyalty of subordinate races, then it would be a good deal. Now Orgrim's wait was finally here. Good. Orgrim hurriedly helped Zhu Jin up. I said that the orcs and great demons are brothers. Frustrated that the attributes of the storm altar had changed again, Gul'dan had Gujar destroy the rune lines on the runestone and abandoned the altar. Deep into the night, not a single tribe was left. An altar that had lost its effectiveness was worthless. Just as the entire forest was shrouded in darkness, a few figures suddenly appeared near the altar. Despicable great demons. Despicable tribe. They actually destroyed the runestone. The one in front was Aurelia. As the eldest daughter of the Windrunner family, and an elf who loved this land, she had always felt that it was her duty to protect it. She knelt down on one knee and inspected the runestone fragments around the altar, a pained expression on her face. The elf's safety barrier, a gigantic magical barrier that had been unbreakable for thousands of years, had been destroyed by Gul'dan just like that. Duque appeared beside Aurelia and gently pressed his hand on her shoulder. Tomorrow morning, bring the broken runestone to the Silver Moon Council. Aurelia immediately interrupted Duque. No. I'll go now. Let's see what those blind counselors have to say this time. The most famous Ranger General was filled with a towering rage. There's no rush. Unless Silvery Moon City is directly attacked, it would be troublesome to summon the counselors in the middle of the night. It's tomorrow morning anyway. Duque easily pacified Aurelia. Then what are we going to do tonight? The one speaking was Windsor Windrunner, the third sister of the Windrunner generation. In the original history, she was already the youngest female member of the family. It was a pity that there was still Lilith who was standing beside him. She was the youngest of them all. Did you think that my painstaking effort to get you to ambush Zhu Jin was a waste of effort? At the mention of Zhu Jin, the four Windrunner sisters gritted their teeth in hatred. In Duke's original plan, it would be best if he could directly destroy Zhu Jin. As the most important link between the beastmen and great demons, Chief Orgrim was the most difficult to kill. On the other hand, Zhu Jin was completely defenseless. The current Zhu Jin was no longer the Amani tribe chief who had awakened new powers and caused havoc in Zul-Aman. Unfortunately, even if he found the four Windrunner sisters to work with him, he still could not take Zhu Jin's life. Duke's plan was always one ring after another. Knowing that Ghoul Dan had used the Storm Altar to strengthen a large number of ogres, Duke had an idea. After Zhu Jin suffered a setback, Zhu Jin would definitely seek greater power. However, Zhu Jin's attributes were incompatible with the Storm Altar. Chapter 370. In order to maintain control over the trolls, Great Chief Orgrim would definitely let Zhu Jin walk onto the altar, and he could not let Zhu Jin die on the altar. Now Duke had made the right bet. Ghoul Dan had left early, leaving behind an altar that still had a lot of energy. While the runestone was still intact, Duke could not risk a group of elven girls going berserk and touch it. Furthermore, he did not have the skills to do so. When Ghoul Dan wanted to get the runestone, he did not have the ability to deal with a former demigod warlock, who was now a Breaking Dawn villain. Furthermore, Orgrim and the trolls' elites were all here. Just a few of them running over would be asking for death. Now everything was different. Something stolen by an enemy would be taken by an ally. The rule of this world was that the ally was the new owner of the item. To return the item to its original owner, a corresponding price had to be paid. Even if the four Windrunner were here, they did not feel that Duke had done anything wrong. Duke bowed slightly, showing respect to one of the important figures behind him. Archbishop Fail Uther, I'll have to trouble you. Ghoul Dan's sorcery was impossible to defend against. That unimaginable power was something that Duke did not want to touch unless he had no other choice. To purify evil, he needed professionals. For this, the prepared Duke had personally invited 2 gods from the Church of Holy Light, as well as a teleportation service. Archbishop Alonso's Fail smiled and nodded. Let me see. A moment later, Alonso smiled. The Ghoul Dan you speak of is indeed a very evil and powerful warlock. However, I discovered that he seemed to have some reservations, and did not completely contaminate these runestones. The remaining curse is not too strong. I can get rid of it in a few minutes. Then I'll leave it to you, Archbishop. If possible, try not to cause too much of a commotion. Duke was definitely playing with fire. The Horde's vanguard was less than 30 kilometers from here, while the Horde's main force was 20 kilometers away. If he caused a commotion, the Horde's dragon knights would arrive in a moment. However, Duke had to seize the opportunity. The High Elves' runic magic circle was a complete defense system with 8 in a row. Apart from this one, Ghoul Dan had destroyed another 2. So the large amount of energy gathered by the runestones would quickly dissipate due to the destruction of the runestones. If he missed this opportunity, he wouldn't be able to find it. This was the only time he could take advantage of the High Elves. There were no other opportunities. In fact, these runestones were processed by countless elven mages and craftsmen over hundreds of years, and it took nearly 1,000 years for them to be completely calibrated. One could well imagine how precious it was. In just a few minutes, Fail had finished dispelling the evil magic. With a warm smile on his face, he said, "My job is very simple. On the other hand, restoring the runic lines embedded in it is a huge project." Duke sighed. "That's my problem." Without hesitation, he opened the portal and sent Fao and Uther away. If the great Archbishop accidentally died in Kuel Salis because of Duke's risky plan, Duke would bet 50 cents that Lothar would definitely come after him. And then, Sylvanas put her hands on her hips. "Don't tell me, Duke, that you're going to spend 10 days to half a month here to rebuild these rubble?" Queen Sylvanas actually wanted to say that they were powdered, completely destroyed runestone fragments. Each piece was not much bigger than a bean. Regardless of whether they could be put back together like a puzzle, even if they could be put back together, how effective would they be? At this moment, Duke was saying in his heart, "Hey System Elf, time to work." Hey, my host, do you really know how to order people around? Is there anyone? Where is he? Why don't I see him? Duque looked around, but not in front of him. Host, you've lost your integrity. You weren't like this before, the system elf said sharply. Cut the crap and get to work. Duque glared. All right. A series of system notifications popped up. Begin scanning. Start analyzing the damaged shape of each runestone. Starting comparison. Hand of Magic activate. Under the astonished gazes of the few guys who followed him, more than 200 hands of magic quickly picked up the rubble of various sizes from the ground, and then glued them together with special glue that had been prepared. Gavin Rad, who was next to him, rolled his eyes with his hammer, as if his boss wasn't human. The hands of magic flew at high speed, with all kinds of dazzling crisscrossing movements. At first, Sasha, who was the most curious of the Windrunner sisters, tried to follow the trajectory of Duque's hands of magic with her eyes. Unfortunately, Sasha quickly fainted. She looked like she was about to faint. Sasha took the opportunity to lean on her elder sister's shoulder and asked in a low voice, Sis, is your boyfriend really a human? Aurelia's face was full of embarrassment. Boyfriend? Aurelia hadn't really thought about this word. Although they both vaguely felt that it was the case, the last layer of thin veil was never revealed. Suddenly exposed by her own sister, Aurelia's face was burning. Admit it. Or not. That was a problem. Admit it. How much? That was also a problem. At this moment, Sylvanas abruptly helped her elder sister out of the situation. Humph. You want to pick the most beautiful and mature flower of the Windrunner family? You'll have to ask us three sisters first. Sasha decisively joined in the fun. Aurelia looked at Sasha, the younger sister who looked similar to her but had bright silver hair, and had mixed feelings. She didn't know how to tell her sister that if they successfully saved Quel Salis this time, she and Sylvanas would become Duque's vassals according to the agreement. There was a sense of reluctance to part, but also a sense of confusion that this seemed to be a good thing. While the three sisters were fooling around, Duque had finished reassembling the runestone. A completely 3D runestone pattern that had been magnified 10 times appeared in Duque's spiritual sea. After comparing Gul'dan's storm altar array with the magic pattern on the runestone, the system finally came up with a result. It was the result of thousands of elven mages' calculations for hundreds of years. Just like how Duque reverse-deduced a complete spell from a simple magic model, he easily deduced how the complete storm altar system worked based on the leftover materials. Done. Duque raised his hand, and the runestone that had been reconstructed immediately disappeared in the wind. He turned to look at the rest of the runestone fragments. Using Gavinrad almost as a 3D printer, Duque held Gavinrad's arm with Hand of Magic, and began to guide him in processing the fragments. After a whole hour, a brand new storm altar appeared in front of everyone. Young man, do you desire power? Duque asked Gavinrad absent-mindedly. Chapter 371. Ha! I already believe in the holy light. Gavinrad immediately replied. I'm not asking you to change your faith. I'm just asking if you're interested in mastering a new, stronger power. Duque replied seriously. I think I'm strong enough. Gavinrad was a little skeptical about Duque's recommendation. Come on, I'm not saying that the power of the holy light isn't good, but the power of the holy light lies in the piety of the heart. Your piety is only slightly above average. So even if your foundation isn't bad, you're still the weakest among the first-generation holy knights. Duque immediately hit Gavinrad's sore spot. In terms of martial arts, Gavinrad wasn't much worse than the other three. The only person whom Gavinrad was convinced of was Sidathrahan. But the power of the holy light came from the heart. The more pious one was, the more passionate one was about the holy light, and the stronger the holy light. After being blessed by the holy light, Uther became the one who could fight the most. He was tied with Turalian for second to last. Well, the weakest was Reginald Windsor. Okay, what power is that? The power of the storm. More accurately, the power of thunder. At this moment, Gavinrad was tempted. This had nothing to do with the characteristics of the holy knight profession. On one hand, it was a matter of potential. This was the path of the holy light. He had reached the end of it. He wasn't as good as the best, but he could not become the best. On the other hand, as a knight from Stormwind City, Gavinrad Bad Luck had good virtues and a martial family heritage. And the fundamental difference between him and Uther and the other first-generation holy knights was hatred. The hatred of being slaughtered by the orcs. Every family in the country had victims, and every Stormwind citizen had a deep hatred for the orcs. His little grudge was nothing much. But the path of the holy light did not allow for personal hatred. Gavinrad could only suppress the anger in his heart and try to numb himself, telling himself that it was a selfless battle. In reality, he had failed. So his holy light power was near the bottom among the first-generation holy knights. If I'm not wrong, you can become a storm knight. Are there any risks? Calm down. When you're in danger, won't you activate invincibility? Oh, activate Holy Shield technique. With that thought, Gavinrad decided to do it. With the same trepidation as the ogre, Gavinrad stood at the center of the altar. At this time, everyone was shocked to find that the altar was still in a state of being unable to be activated. According to the simplest estimation, it would take 5 pharaohs to activate. At this moment, Duque put on a magnificent performance. True mirror image. Duque's figure suddenly became blurry, and a blue Duque walked out from Duque's body. It was obvious that the one who walked out was a doppelganger. However, in less than a tenth of a second, the doppelganger that walked out of the doppelganger's body was quickly dyed with real colors, like a child playing a coloring game. In the blink of an eye, it was impossible to tell the difference between the doppelganger and the original Duque. 2 Duques came out, then 3 Duques. In the end, a total of 5 Duques walked out of the original body. Unlike the Orc Sword Saint's rigid mirror image, which had the exact same movements as the original body, Duque's doppelganger seemed to be completely independent of the original body. They took different steps, and Duque, who was walking to the furthest position, jogged over. The 2 further away were walking at a brisk pace, while Duke's avatar, who was closest to them, was practically crawling. Different expressions, different movements. Such a vivid performance left the Windrunner sisters speechless. Second sister, are my eyes playing tricks on me? Why does it look like there are many brothers-in-law? Sasha shook her second sister's shoulder in astonishment, not even realizing that she had used the wrong address. It was also Sylvana's first time seeing this divine skill of Duque's. She tried her best to observe and spread out her senses, and only after a while did she realize the difference between the doppelganger and the original body. The doppelganger did not breathe, and there was no smell. However, the doppelganger had a real body. She felt the air that the doppelganger created when it moved forward, forming a weak wind. Aurelia was dazzled. And very naturally, she remembered the first time she met Duque. It was a chance encounter, and she thought that she had met a ghost, but she found a magical mage seedling. And when Duque was killed for the second time, she happened to witness it. To be honest, she still had not figured out what happened back then. But now, she felt that most of her doubts were explained. Duque was definitely a super magic genius. Of course, no one knew that Duque had killed the chief of the Fireblade clan, Sword Saint Dar Triple Bloodblade, to get mirror image of truth. After everything was ready, the 5 doppelgangers of Duque began to cast spells at the same time under the control of the system elf. The principle was not much different from controlling Hand of Magic. In the eyes of others, it was cool. 5 doppelgangers that could chant different spells at the same time. With this talent, this magical method, the Windrunner sisters began to understand why Duque could rise so quickly in such a short time. It was almost the same as when Gul'dan activated the altar. But because the pollution of the altar had been dispelled by Archbishop Fail, the tornado in the sky was golden and white. The mighty power of the lightning in the sky was broken down into countless threads and entered Gavinrad's body, modifying the body of the first holy knight who was killed by Earthies in history. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. Such a large-scale phenomenon could not be hidden from anyone. 40 kilometers away, Gul'dan, who was breaking the second runestone defense line in the Longsong Forest, was suddenly alarmed. Someone actually restored the storm altar. That's impossible. You guys go and take a look. Unfortunately, Gul'dan Guggle and the few remaining warlocks of the Shadow Council were busy. They planned to use a new batch of runestones to build a new altar, and could not leave at all. Having no choice, Gul'dan could only order Talon Gorefiend, the first Death Knight in the world who had been strengthened by the Storm Altar, to go and take a look. Distance was an important factor. Warlocks did have the ability to teleport teammates across space through the means of summoning, but the premise was that there was a warlock on their side and 2 allies at the destination. Now there was not a single tribe within 10 kilometers of Duque. At this time, the modification of Gavin Rad was completed. Chapter 372. Gavin Rad now had a hammer. It was his original physical hammer, as well as the Tempest Hammer, which was formed by the power of lightning in his left hand. Walking out of the altar, every step Gavin Rad exuded a terrifying power that was no weaker than Thunderstrike. With his feet as the center, large amounts of lightning spread out from the cracked ground. Tiny pieces of earth floated into the sky, ignoring gravity, but were turned into dust by the lightning that Gavin Rad released in midair. Gavin Rad was full of style now. This aura was no weaker than that of the Burning Legion's boss. Even if someone told Duque that Gavin Rad Misfortune was the real boss behind the scenes, if Duke didn't know what was going on, he would definitely believe 80% of it. Unfortunately, Gavin Rad's own words revealed the secret. Perhaps the iron rule of not being cool for 3 seconds worked. Gavin Rad actually asked, "A boss Duque, will I electrocute my wife when I marry her in the future?" The Windrunner sisters almost fell off the tree. Annoyed, Duque rolled his eyes. "Idiot, can't you learn how to control your power? If that really happens, you can just marry a female holy knight. She won't die from electrocution." Duque didn't finish his sentence. "If you're so stupid that you can't control your power, then when you do the life inheritance ritual with your wife, you can bathe her in holy light." Young man, it's a good thing to be full screen censored in battle." Duke didn't bother with Gavin Rad anymore, and sent him to watch over the place. Time is limited. Which Windrunner wants to be the next to obtain power? Gul'dan has already destroyed the runestone's energy field. In another half a day, the energy will dissipate without use. Also, this is the power passed down by the High Elves for thousands of years. The 4 Windstalker sisters looked at each other, none of them able to move their feet. Duke's next sentence caused the 2 sisters to be unable to remain calm. "This is the Storm Altar. An altar that can awaken the power of those with suitable attributes. There are only 3 types of awakenings: thunder, fire, and wind. The power of the wind. This was a temptation that no Windrunner could resist. Once upon a time, the Windrunner were proud of their unparalleled archery skills. In their hearts, there was nothing that they could not kill with a single arrow. Unfortunately, more and more powerful monsters overturned their thoughts. A Death Knight who wouldn't necessarily die, even if his head was pierced through. An ogre with 2 heads and 3 hearts. According to Duque, in the Draenor world where the orcs were originally from, there was a powerful creature that ruled over the ogres. Their name was Gollin. These terrifying creatures usually had a height of more than 10 meters, a huge body, and unparalleled brute force. In the coming days, they were likely to become the orcs' tools of war. They couldn't imagine the terrifying behemoth rampaging through the elven battle formation. Improving himself was already an urgent need. In addition, it was the power of the wind. The Windrunner's prime power. There was no way to refuse. As the eldest sister, Aurelia was the first to stand up. "Duque, is this power safe?" Duque sighed. "This is the power left behind by your high elf ancestors. It has even been purified by the holy light. Alright, I'll go first. When I'm sure it's safe, I'll let you guys come too." Aurelia's beautiful figure stood in the center of the altar. Duque quickly began to cast the spell. After a short spell, there was no terrifying lightning and thunder like when Gavin Rad was awakened. Instead, a gentle whirlwind appeared around Aurelia. It was gentle and soft, like a mother caressing her child and murmuring a nursery rhyme in her ear. The feeling of the breeze caressing their faces was very comfortable. It was so comfortable that everyone present felt like falling asleep. Everyone heard the sound of the wind. Huff, huff, huff. It was the pulse of the earth and the breath of the sky. Gently opening her arms, Aurelia let her whole body bathe in the wind. In the wind, there was the scent of grass, the fragrance of the earth, and the unique fragrance of the forest. Listening to the sound of the wind and receiving its teachings, Aurelia was in a trance, as if she was intoxicated. The rapid energy reaction on the altar gradually subsided. The three Windrunner sisters watched their eldest sister, who was sitting down in the middle of the altar, and their hearts tightened. The most rebellious and easily agitated Servanas stared at Duque. Duque made an okay gesture, but then realized that they didn't understand, so he gave a thumbs up. Even though they were relieved, the three Windrunner sisters still stared at their eldest sister nervously. Suddenly Aurelia, who had her eyes closed, stood up. She took out her longbow and pulled the bowstring, but she didn't nock an arrow. Shooting without a bowstring was the foundation of archery. What was their eldest sister doing? Aurelia's next action told everyone the answer. She shot an arrow. When she pulled the bowstring into the shape of a full moon, a gust of wind blew around the altar. The storm was gathering, obeying Aurelia Windrunner's request, voluntarily forming a wind arrow in less than half a second. This wasn't an illusion. The three Windrunner sisters saw the scene where the arrow should have been knocked change. Under normal circumstances, such a scene would only occur when the high temperature caused the water vapor on the ground to evaporate, distorting the light. Now it appeared in Aurelia's hands. As the two tender fingers loosened, the sound of the bowstring vibrating suddenly rang out. However, there was no sound of the arrow being shot. No one could see the arrow's trajectory clearly. Everyone just instinctively looked in the direction the bow was aimed at. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. When the time reached 3 seconds, there was a reaction 500 meters away. A huge flower of blood bloomed on the treetops. For humans, it was already beyond the limit of their eyesight. To them, it was just a small dot. For the elven rangers with amazing eyesight, it was a huge test. However, the three Windrunner sisters saw it. Unparalleled accuracy. A powerful shot. 500 meters away, an arrow pierced through the troll's chest. Starting from the chest, the troll's entire body exploded into countless pieces. It was a troll scout. It wasn't easy to find this guy, who was good at hiding and had the same color as the forest, from 500 meters away. Not to mention this kind of attack that was almost beyond visual range. Aurelia finally opened her eyes, a warm smile on her dignified face. My sisters, I strongly recommend you to explore the limits of your power. Chapter 373. Storms were gathering, and thunder was roaring. Power was surging, and destiny was being rewritten. Duque raised his head, and looked at the vast and boundless sea of trees. His deep, black eyes looked past the lush forest, the marching orcs, and finally landed on the tribal flags that were fluttering in the wind like rags. No one knew what Duque was thinking. That sharp divine light that could pierce through all the fog and see the truth was what confused and intoxicated Aurelia the most. Duque's gaze seemed to contain the mysteries of the entire universe. After letting out a soft sigh, the divine light in Duque's eyes became more and more blurred. It was as if he had turned into a bronze dragon that controlled time, making time flow according to his will. It was as if he could see the torrent of history rolling forward according to its original direction, crushing all the hard work he had done. It shackled him with the shackles of time and space, allowing history to return to the path he was familiar with. The mysterious and unfathomable river of destiny seemed to have secretly merged with every river and sea in Azeroth, coiling around every mountain, plain, and continent. The future was like a layer of fog that could never be dispelled, shrouding the entire alliance, and even the entire Azeroth. Duque didn't know how much his hard work could change the future. He could imagine that the current 79% accuracy rate would make the originally fixed future even more fragmented and unpredictable because of his hard work. To make up for those who have passed away, and the regrets that I thought were irreversible, everything is worth it, Duque muttered softly. In the past hour, The people around Duque all received unexpected benefits. Lightning! Servanas shouted, and surging waves of lightning gathered in her palm, turning into lightning arrows that contained great power. The lightning that circled around her made her look like a goddess of lightning that stood above the 9 heavens. Wind soaring. Vanessa had also awakened the power of the wind. Although she couldn't compare to her sister Aurelia in terms of quality and quantity, she was exceptionally light. It wasn't hard to imagine that Vanessa would have an absolute advantage in terms of speed. Eagle Eye. Lilith was a little puzzled. She had awakened this scouting ability. It didn't feel like it had much to do with the wind, and there was almost no increase in combat power. Wind release. Vanessa waved her 2 daggers agilely in the air. The graceful twirls in the air made people wonder if she had already overcome gravity. Ice mist. After dispelling the influence of the wind, Alicia easily condensed a cold mist in the air and enveloped herself. When the people around her finished upgrading, they all turned to look at Duque. Dooku, even though the horde is almost here, we can help you hold them off for at least 10 minutes. If there's anything else you can get, just do it. Illyria's encouragement came from the wind. The other 3 Windrunner sisters nodded in unison. Duke smiled. He first opened a portal and sent Alicia and Vanessa, the 2 weaker ones, back. He then stood on the storm altar. After standing on it, Duque couldn't help but laugh. Once upon a time, he had been worried about the gains and losses of even the most basic, level 1 fireball spell. Now that he was faced with an unknown power, Duque was surprised to find that he didn't seem to have much hope or fear for the final outcome. Perhaps it was because he had changed from a simple transmigrator to a university. After experiencing numerous challenges and hardships, he had completely matured. He had worried countless times that if history had changed drastically, he would lose his judgment of the future. But after ascending to a high position and commanding the Alliance's army to victory time and time again, his heart was becoming more determined. He began to have confidence and was no longer afraid of failure or setbacks. Thinking about the forces that would invade Azeroth in the future, and the terrifying monsters that could easily be as tall as a 10-story building, he was originally a little afraid. But now, the results of his hard work were turning into a source of confidence. The power of magic. The power of power. The support of friends and subordinates. All of these turned into an indescribable confidence that supported him to continue moving forward. As long as he grasped this power, he would have endless power to overcome all obstacles, break through the fate of destruction, dispel the fog in front of him, and embark on the path of the bright future. That was the fate of Azeroth and Duque's fate. With that thought, Duque no longer hesitated. The 5 avatars chanted a simple incantation, driving the temporarily made storm altar to make its final effort. The force of nature deep in the ground that was about to dissipate was surging for the last time under the guidance of Duque's will. The feedback from various parts of the altar allowed the force of earth to connect with his body, giving him a feeling that the force of earth was connected to his fate and magic circuit. The next moment, a strong gust of wind blew in the sky again. Countless drifting forces in the air gathered in the direction of the storm altar in an even more exaggerated and majestic manner than the people who had awakened before. It was a giant tornado that hovered 100 meters in the air and had a diameter of more than 5 kilometers. For a moment, Aurelia and the others all turned to look at it. Countless long purple-blue lightning bolts were twisting in the air above the storm altar like spiritual snakes. The high-energy lightning chains disintegrated and filtered all impurities, making the wind blowing on the altar extremely cool and clean. The cool breeze wrapped around Duque's limbs and blew away all the dirt on Duque's body. The lightning came to Duque's head and turned into countless tiny harmless electric currents that entered Duque's shoulders and flowed throughout Duque's body. The strange feeling of the lightning entering his body was not the numbing feeling of destruction that he had imagined. Instead, it was a little strange. In the slightly numb feeling, Duque felt that his body was becoming more and more resilient under the stimulation of the electric currents. And the special understanding of wind, lightning, and fire began to spread to the depths of his soul. This was not an empty experience that came through incantations or spells. This was the most direct and unobstructed contact with the force of nature. It was precisely because of this rare experience that he had rooted in the deepest part of his heart that the power of his magic would definitely reach a higher level. In Duque's vision, the emerald green system notification was jumping wildly along with the surging storm power in the air. Congratulations, host, you have mastered the power of wind and lightning. You have comprehended and mastered the special improved spell, Thunder Spear. You have mastered the thunderstorm wall. You have mastered the electric shield. Chapter 374. There was nothing much to say about the scene of Duque leading everyone to retreat. Duque didn't plan on fighting Ghoul Dan while he was surrounded by the Beastmen. After the Windrunner wreaked havoc on the Beastmen, Duque opened a portal and retreated. If they didn't leave now, once Ghoul Dan arrived, no one would be able to leave. The only thing Duque could use now was Ghoul Dan's contempt for him. Or rather, Ghoul Dan's scheme to screw Orgrim over. Early the next morning, Aurelia appeared outside the Silvermoon Council's meeting hall. Apologies, General Windrunner. The Silvermoon Council is currently in its daily meeting. You can't enter. You barged into the council last time, and many council members are furious at your reckless and vulgar actions. The guard captain blocked Aurelia. The huge kite shield in his hand was dazzling in Aurelia's eyes. Aurelia did her best to suppress her emotions. Eversong Forest has been invaded. From yesterday afternoon until this morning, we lost a total of 7 teams. The highest level of requests for help have filled the entire communication room. And now you're telling me not to disturb that damn daily meeting. We're in a state of war. But, without another word, Aurelia took out the thing that Duque had asked her to bring last night. The head of a troll. It spun in the air. Its long black hair that was braided into dozens of strange braids dancing in the air. The sunlight shone on its long fangs, and it crashed into the kite shield that blocked all information from the outside world. Finally, it landed at the feet of the guard captain. The air froze for a moment. Every single one of the 12 guards stared at the head. In the next moment, Aurelia opened a bag and revealed the thing inside. It was a beautiful magic crystal nameplate that marked the identity of a high elf soldier. If the nameplate was taken off, it would only mean one thing: death in battle. There were many nameplates, but the most shocking thing was that among the bloodstained nameplates, the guard captain found many nameplates of platoon leaders and even senior captains. The faces of all the guards suddenly changed. Aurelia once again broke into the Silvermoon Council that she was familiar with and hated. When the chairman of the parliament saw Aurelia's heroic and dignified face, he was immediately enraged. For the sake of Silverymoon City, can you stop interrupting the sacred meeting? I'm really sorry. No matter how good-tempered Aurelia was, when she saw these high and mighty counselors who did not care about worldly affairs, the anger in her heart rose to her throat. Longsong Forest has been invaded. Are you only willing to stop the sacred meeting and face the coming of the war, when the tribe reaches this sacred gate? Everyone could hear the bitter irony in Aurelia's words. Impossible. A great lord suddenly stood up and pointed a finger at Aurelia, his tone abnormally harsh. No one can survive after passing through those runestones. Ha. No. Aurelia raised her long golden eyebrows. Are you sure? Are you talking about this kind of runestone? Aurelia took out a piece of runestone the size of 2 palms from her bag, raised her hand, and threw it at the great lord. The lifespan of the high elves was quite long, and many of the counselors present were mages who had set up the runestones. It was precisely because of the great achievement of firmly protecting Kuel Salis that they could transcend ordinary people and become noble beings who dared to challenge the king and were superior to all beings. Now their pride, their reliance, had vanished into thin air in the blink of an eye. Every counselor's heart beat violently, and they almost forgot to breathe. Great Lord Moria, your territory seems to be in the southern part of the Longsong Forest, right? Do you want to find a high balcony and see if there are flames rising in your territory? Illyria's words made High Lord Moria jump up as if his buttocks had been slapped by a whip. Ignoring the clown, Aurelia looked straight at the Sun King. I don't want to repeat the warning I've given you. I just want to tell you a fact. There is no doubt that the trolls have entered our forest, trampled our land, and slaughtered our people. The orcs that I've mentioned are now following them. They don't have the agility and stealth of the trolls, but they have strong bodies and their numbers are like locusts. They are planning to destroy our home together with the trolls. Aurelia panted heavily, and her chest rose and fell rapidly. The whole hall was very, very quiet, and only her heavy breathing could be heard. Aurelia raised her head, and there was endless pain and heartache on her face. Finally, I just want to ask, are you all damn deaf and blind? Do you want all the rangers at the border to die in battle? Do you want all the elves in the Longsong Forest to be slaughtered? Do you want to wait until you face the ferocious faces of the trolls and smell their nauseating breath? Only then are you willing to admit that a full-scale war has come to us, the High Elves. Aurelia's voice was very melodious. As she pleaded, she opened the blood-stained bag again, and countless nameplates fell out and fell on the shiny white tiles, making clanking sounds. Whether it was the king, the speaker, or the counselors, the pupils of all the elves suddenly shrank, and they stared at the nameplates for a long time, speechless. They looked at the fresh troll head presented by the guard captain. The Sun King, a Nastrian Sunstrider, burst out with a loud roar. Damn! This time, the Sun King's outburst was not because of Aurelia. The Elven King slapped the troll's head hard, and it flew into the air. The head did not have a chance to fall to the ground, because in mid-air, it had been instantly incinerated by the Sun King's destructive flames. The high-temperature embers scattered on the floor of the Silver Moon Council's meeting hall. The Sun King furrowed his brows, and his eyes that were muddy most of the time became as sharp as a sword. The trolls dare to invade our home? Anastrian was completely enraged. They dare to do this? He looked up, and his expression was like that of a furious brown bear. We will let them use their lives and blood to wash away their sins. Gather our warriors, gather our rangers. We will launch an all-out attack on the trolls, drive them out of our forest, and use their heads to build our new border. Chapter 375. Although Aurelia was happy to see her king finally become determined, she had to remind the Sun King. The trolls are not everything. The threat of the horde is the most important. Fortunately, I brought powerful reinforcements. Duke Marcus of Stormwind City and his 30,000 private soldiers. Unexpectedly, the Sun King refused. No, I don't need human help. The High Elves can deal with the invaders themselves. Summon my son Kael'Vats. Aurelia instinctively felt that something was wrong. The elves were too arrogant and isolated. They thought that they were the source of the world's civilization. They thought that humans were just picking up the magic left behind by the elves. They thought that the mechanical creations of the dwarves and gnomes were evil. Thousands of years of isolation had not brought the elves anything other than the arrogance of the High Elves. No, perhaps there was. It was depravity. Thinking back to 3,000 years ago, Anastrian had almost been forced to abdicate by the Silver Moon Council. The reason was that Anastrian had taught the humans too much magic. Aurelia shouted for her king to pay attention to the orcs. Unfortunately, her opinion was once again ignored. Her clear voice was drowned out by the noisy argument between the Lord and the mage counselors. In the end, the Sun King dismissed Aurelia with a few words. Thank you for informing me again, my Ranger General. Now is the time for you to fulfill your duty. Bring your Ranger troops and stop all the trolls. Before our army arrives, I do not wish to hear more news of the fall of the trolls. Wait, where are the reinforcements? Our losses are already very severe. More than half of the troops have been crippled, and we have less than half of our full strength. Aurelia tried to argue. There are no reinforcements. Even if you can't do it, you must do it. The country let you lead the Ranger troops to pacify the border. Yes, evacuating the people is also your duty. If you can't stop them, then bury yourself there too. What a joke. The Ranger troops that were left with less than 3,000 people to fight against the allied army of 100,000 orcs and trolls? One had to know that the Elven Rangers had no advantage against the trolls. The current situation was that they couldn't even stop the trolls, and they still had to evacuate the civilians. Aurelia was furious. Of course, at this time Aurelia naturally thought of Duque. Unexpectedly, the Sun King added, I don't care if your boyfriend is nearby. You are now the general of Cuel Salis. Do your duty, or I will prosecute you for treason. Also, if humans enter our borders without our permission, then we'll deal with them the same way we dealt with the trolls. The Sun King's words made Aurelia's heart sink into an icy hell. What time was it? Did they really think that they could rely on the elves to win this interracial war? It was obvious that they couldn't win if they didn't work together. Your Majesty. Aurelia raised her voice. Guards, take her away. Let the council send an army supervisor to ensure that the two generals of the Windrunner family fulfill their duties. The Sun King waved his hand, and nearly 10 kite shields of the Imperial Guards quickly blocked the line of sight between her and the Sun King. Sorry, it's my duty. Please. The guard captain didn't look good either. Everyone's eyes were bright. Aurelia, the hero of the Trolls' War, had been stationed at the border for more than 3,000 years for the safety of Cuel Salis. This time, she had informed them of the large-scale invasion of the trolls in advance. The first time, she was completely humiliated by the counselors with words. The second time, even though she had the great merit of alerting the higher-ups, she was given the cold shoulder again because of her background. In the end, it was because all the higher-ups of the elves were mages, and they had a fanatical admiration for spellcasters. All beings other than the spellcasters were regarded as cannon fodder. If the Windrunner family was a mage family, she would have become the hero of Cuel Salis again by now. Aurelia was taken away. When a substitute counselor appeared among the heavily damaged rangers as an army supervisor, everyone's lungs were about to explode. Bastard. The Silver Moon Council is like Chocobo **T. Sister. Since we agreed to become Duque's vassals, we might as well let Duque's troops come in early, and we'll just pretend we didn't see it. Servanas, the most rebellious of the Windrunner sisters, cursed angrily. But all she got was a slap in the face. Servanas was stunned by the slap. Aurelia's sharp voice said, You and I are now Cuel Salis's ranger generals. Right now our hometown is under attack. How can you face the country and the people by saying this? As long as we still carry the epaulets of Cuel Salis, His Majesty's orders are absolute. Not to mention Servanas. Even Aurelia felt an unsuppressible sense of grievance. Servanas argued unwillingly. There are clearly better ways to solve this crisis and avert a possible disaster, but you gave up everything because of your arrogance. This kind of method will kill countless people. Do you really want to suppress your unhappiness and force yourself to accept it? What else can I do? This is a time of war. If after the war, everyone is safe, of course I can peacefully serve Duque. But right now our hometown is burning. If I do anything special, it will be treason. Aurelia couldn't help but shout. Sasha and Lilith watched the two sisters argue and couldn't get a word in. Both sides felt that they were right, but they couldn't come up with any better ideas. Sasha could only look like she was about to cry and persuade the two sisters to stop arguing. Servanas stubbornly said, Idiot. Don't you rely on Duque a lot? Then go find him. That guy has a lot of ideas. I'm sure he will think of something better than you. Yes. Why don't you go find Duque? With her sister's cover, Aurelia found the human mage that Duque had placed in the ranger army, Darnielle, and asked him to send a message to Duque using magic. Very soon Aurelia contacted Duque. After she told him about her difficulties, Duque laughed. Idiot, you should have come to me earlier. I was thinking, if you were captured by the Sun King, should I declare war on Cuel Salis? Or should I use political means to bail you out? Please, I'm asking for your help. Duque, don't make trouble. Aurelia sounded like she was about to cry. You must be joking. This joke isn't funny at all. All right, leave the task of delaying the orcs to me. You focus on organizing the evacuation of the people? What do you plan to do? Your soldiers can't cross the border. I promise that not a single soldier from the Alliance or Stormwind will cross the border. Chapter 376. Once again, It was proven that Aurelia had once again underestimated Duque's intelligence. Or rather, she had underestimated Duque's ability to play with words. On this day, more than 5,000 goblin spirit robots strode across the Kuel-Salis border, which was no longer under the control of the elves. The Windrunner sisters were dumbfounded. They were completely dumbfounded. This is possible? Aurelia looked at Duque on the other side of the border. Why not? Duque put his hands on his hips. Is it wrong for a toy to accidentally cross the border? Furthermore, which eye of yours saw that these are mine? These are clearly elven products. Aurelia rolled her eyes at Duque flirtatiously. Her expression was truly complicated. She was gratified, but also did not know whether to laugh or cry. Right. In theory, these goblins belong to the elves. Why? Did he not see the words Kuel-Salis 10,086th Border Guard, written in the human language on the outer shell of the goblin's armor? Of course, the elves would not have such a terrible designation, nor would they use a language other than the High Elves' language. They would also not have these gnome-style robots that would affect the appearance of the elves. Silvermoon City also had battle puppets, but those magic puppets were all round and curvaceous. They were obviously arcane style. In any case, not a single human soldier had crossed the border. In order to avoid suspicion, Duque had even transferred Darnielle back. A perfect game of words. Duque naturally would not do such a thing for the Bulsh *T Sun King. He only did it for the Windrunner sisters. More accurately, it was for Aurelia. Aurelia was very clear what Duque had paid for this. Duque had set up a fully automated robot production line in Karazhan. Naturally, Khadgar would help Duque with the work. To transport so many goods over, Duque had to do it himself. Duque was still not strong enough. He could only transport no more than 1 ton of people or goods at a time. Even so, Duque was exhausted. He was like a dead dog for the whole day. However, it was enough to receive a grateful look from Aurelia. He had to fight in the horde, and he had to pick up girls along the way. Nothing could be more perfect than that. On this day, the giant demon army, which had originally had an overwhelming advantage, ran into a huge problem. Because of Yao Yao Ling. Most of the giant demons that had been tricked by Yao Yao had died. The tribe was indeed annoyed by the warning function of the demon spirits. No one had expected that the combined power of the Yao Yao spirit and the Elven Ranger would be so amazing. Those seemingly silly mechanical creations wandered aimlessly in the Longsong forest. However, a high-speed paint arrow would suddenly shoot out from the Yao Yao spirit and hit a giant demon that was hiding on the tree. In a jungle battle, under the premise that both sides wanted to kill the other, the most important thing was to discover the other side first. In previous battles, concealment and enemy detection techniques were the most important. Observation, judgment, and experience were all indispensable. Any miscalculation would result in death. The appearance of the Yao Yao spirit completely broke this balance. First of all, the Yao Yao spirit was not afraid of death. It was a mechanical creation, and if it was destroyed, it could be dragged away. It was impossible to repair it on the spot. Duque ran back to Karazhan overnight to practice engineering, and all he could do was fiddle with a mobile version of the waste recycling robot 74A. This thing would automatically find the dead Yao Yao spirit robots in the forest, recycle their wreckage, and decompose them into the necessary engineering parts. Without any worries, the Yao Yao spirit naturally went to seek death. The Elven Ranger squad followed far behind, and the Yao Yao spirit boldly opened the way. For example, this time the Yao Yao spirit suddenly shouted, "Help! There's a pervert!" After splashing paint on a certain troll on the tree, the troll himself was hit by a flying axe and died immediately. Its sacrifice was worth it. In the next second, the giant demon was shot in the head by the Elven Ranger who followed. The Rangers were embarrassed, but it was undeniable that the Yao Yao spirit's reconnaissance was very good. They concluded a pattern that they didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There's a pervert. There was a giant demon. There are a few perverts. There were no more than 5 giant demons. So many perverts. That was about 10. No, there are too many perverts. I have to give up on healing. This meant that there were more than 50 giant demons, and the rangers had to retreat immediately. It had to be said that with the help of the Yao Yao spirit, Aurelia only relied on less than 3,000 rangers to hold off 50,000 giant demons. She also freed up more than 300 rangers with minor injuries to organize the evacuation in the rear. Everyone, don't panic. Hold on, Silvermoon's reinforcements will arrive soon. In order to calm the people, Aurelia had to say some nonsense that she didn't even believe herself. How could Silvermoon's reinforcements arrive so quickly? Unless a Nastrian was willing to send out Silvermoon's regular army, it would take at least 3 days to gather the troops. But would the Horde give her 3 days? It was also that night that the Horde's main force arrived. Unlike the giant demons who charged straight into Longsong Forest, the orcs also sent out a detachment to attack the Windrunner's hometown, Windwalk Village, and the Windrunner Tower at the southwestern edge of Longsong Forest. Thanks to Aurelia's advance notice, even though the officials sent by Silvermoon forbade the Windrunner family from evacuating to Silvermoon in advance, every family had already made preparations to retreat. Packing things in advance was not against the law, was it? Almost as soon as Silvermoon's permission to retreat was given, all the elves in the village threw their belongings into the elven transport ships that had been prepared beforehand in an orderly manner. In just 2 hours they had all evacuated. The detachment of the orcs could only run back and follow behind the main force to guard against Duque's possible attack. However, the efforts of the rangers only managed to slow down the Horde. The Horde's green tide drowned out all resistance. In just 3 days, the Horde had killed their way to the Eastern Temple, which was only 100 kilometers south of Silvermoon City. The elves relied solely on the temple's powerful magical defense system to resist the Horde's attack. As the Horde invested a large number of two-headed ogre mages, the situation began to worsen. At this moment, Prince Kale, that's who had rushed back, saw the army of 25,000 people that had been hastily assembled. Looking at the troops that his father and the Silvermoon Council had gathered for him, Kale, that's face was ashen. What kind of joke is this? This is the army that you want me to fight against a 100,000 Horde army? Most of the 25,000 people were local garrison troops that had withdrawn from the front lines. Unlike the rangers who had always been fighting at the front lines, the training of these garrison troops was terrible, and most of them had been killed by the orcs. Most importantly, Kale, that's realized that there was a serious lack of warriors in this army. Warriors who could hold the front and suppress the enemy's formation. Chapter 377. I'm sorry, my child. This is the strongest army I can gather for you. Kale that's looked excited. For the sake of the Well of the Sun. Didn't I keep sending letters to my father a year ago to tell him about the threat of the tribe? All the motions to prepare for war were rejected by the council. The reason was that Kuel Salis was not at risk of being affected by the flames of war, so there was no reason to increase the defense budget. In fact, until 3 days ago, the councillors still believed that the runestone array was invincible. Now the entire Kuel Salis is in chaos, and the country seriously lacks pre-war mobilization. We are very passive. The Sun King sighed deeply, his face filled with worry and resentment. Council. Council. Silvermoon Council again. The cancer that imprisoned the entire High Elves and rejected all progress and change. The resentment in his heart almost caused Kale, that's chest to explode. No matter how well educated he was, he had the urge to scream and vent his anger. Why did a prince like him have to study in the Dalajan for a long time? To put it nicely, it was to let the prince go out to absorb new knowledge. To put it bluntly, the Silvermoon Council, whose power was above the royal power, exiled him in order to limit the royal power. Who could understand the frustration of not being able to return to his home? His excellent self-restraint allowed Kale, that's to suppress the anger in his heart. Of course, over the years in the Dalajan, Kale, that's had also gained a lot of knowledge. Perhaps the High Elves had unparalleled talent in using magic, but the development of magic was no longer the same magic world in the minds of the elves that had not changed for thousands of years. It was bad enough that the high-level elves refused to accept new things, but they were so arrogant and stupid that they did not even care about the enemy in front of them. They only cried out when the enemy put a knife to their neck. Ah. So there really is an enemy? Although he was angry, Kale that was still very clear-headed. Having deeply experienced the ferocity of the tribe, he knew very well that it was impossible for this rotten army to defeat the tribe. But for the sake of his people, Kale that's resolutely accepted this appointment. There was no other reason, just because his surname was Sunstrider. He was the only heir of the Kuel-Salis royal family. Since birth, he had been trained as a perfectionist, and glory and responsibility had long been branded in the deepest part of his noble soul. He was duty-bound to save his hometown. Kale that's lowered his head and said, "Father, for the sake of the well of the sun and the continuation of the High Elves, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for Kuel-Salis." Sacrifice his life? These words were very serious, so serious that even the Sun King was shocked. He immediately felt that something was wrong. He knew very well that his son wouldn't say such harsh words without any special reason. The Sun King wanted his only successor to die on the battlefield? Stop joking. It wasn't easy to find an opportunity to make things difficult for the council. Anastrian summoned Kale that's back so that Kale that's could have a glorious return like a king. So that Kale that's could better inherit his throne in the future, and one day limit the excessive power of the Silver Moon Council. Child, is this tribe really that powerful? Anastrian's energy was no longer what it used to be. Too much of it had been consumed by internal strife, turning the Sun King who ended the war against the trolls into a fatuous ruler, who was an expert in internal strife and a layman in external warfare. The upper echelons of Kuel-Salis wouldn't take ordinary warriors seriously. No matter how many orc warriors there were, they would only treat them as ants. After deliberating in his heart for a while, Kale that said, "Let's not talk about anything else. There's a warlock named Ghoul Dan among the orcs in the tribe. He fought to a draw with the Dalajan Antonidas in a head-on battle." The Sun King was finally moved. Whether it was him or the Silver Moon Council, most of them looked down on human mages. But there was an exception, Antonidas, the strongest super-genius mage in the Dalajan in the past 100 years. In a semi-public competition 30 years ago, Anastrian and Antonidas had fought to a draw. This battle had also established Antonidas' transcendental status in the Dalajan. The Sun King could look down on any spellcaster, but he couldn't look down on Antonidas. Powerhouses didn't discriminate between races or countries. An orc powerhouse who was as famous as Antonidas couldn't be overestimated. The Sun King rubbed his chin. "Child, how about this? I'll give you a team of arcane puppets from the garrison of Silvermoon City, along with 10 mountain giants and 2 spellbreakers. Go fight a beautiful victory and come back." Kale that's face finally lit up. At that moment, the father and son didn't realize that they'd been tricked. First, it was Gul'dan. In the entire alliance and even the world of Azeroth, no one except Duque knew where Gul'dan's true strength was. In terms of high-end combat power, the elves had made the first mistake. Second, it was their understanding of the orc warrior's strength. Other than the Windrunner sisters, none of the high-ranking elves had personally been to the battlefield. Their understanding of the orcs was also only on paper. They only saw the exchange ratio after the battle between the humans and the orcs. They felt that the humans and orcs suffered similar losses, so they equated the combat power of the orc warriors with the human warriors. No one cared. This was the exchange ratio that Duque had used to its limit. Finally, it was the change brought about by the runestones. In the elves' impression, the runestone's defensive circle was broken, so be it. No one could understand how much the storm altar, which was made of runestones, could improve the tribe. Now that all the ogres in the tribe had become two-headed, the physical qualities of the ogres were considered high on this planet. After the biggest problem of mental retardation had been eliminated, their combat power had more than doubled. Moreover, there were a large number of ogre mages among the thousands of ogres. How could a single-core CPU compare to a dual-core one? Just like that, the great Prince Kale that's valiantly led the army against the invaders on his first journey in life. The army of 27,000 people stretched from the capital of Silvermoon City all the way to the city gate. In the majestic army, every soldier's armor was adorned with exquisite carvings and patterns. A bright red background, beautiful golden edges, and a winged headband that only had weak defensive capabilities apart from decoration. Since they were fighting at home, the chocobos that pulled the carriages did not bring too much baggage. Instead, they brought a large number of magic stones and various musical instruments to boost morale. A mage close to the Windrunner family sent a magic mirror. When Duque and the others saw this scene, they were completely dumbfounded. Even a righteous young man like Reginald Windsor could not help but complain. What the hell? Are they going to war or an armed patrol? Chapter 378. War. In every war, there would be all sorts of strange things, be it inventions, tactics, or something else. A country with enough strategic depth could rely on its vast territory to fight and retreat, giving the rear enough time to react and grow, accumulating strength for a future counterattack. Small countries, once their capital was used up, it would be easy for the country to be destroyed in a few days. Cuel Salis was neither big nor small. In terms of land area, its actual territory was about Eversong Forest and half of the land of the Ghost in the future. At most, it was a third of the size of Lordaeron. In the land of the Ghost, the other half was the Trolls' territory, which was controlled by Zwaman's Amani Troll clan. Their territory clearly did not have any strategic depth, but they still rejected the humans' help and played the tactic of adding fuel to the fire. Duque did not know what to say about this. Rubbing his brow, Duque whispered, "It's good to let Aurelia give up." With that, Duque conveyed his analysis to Aurelia. Aurelia immediately rushed to Kale. That sighed as if her butt was on fire. "Your Highness, are you planning to let the army fight the horde on the plains?" Aurelia was someone who knew how to use troops. With so many burly arcane constructs and the even larger mountain giants, it was impossible for them to fight in the forest. "What's the problem, General Windrunner? General Windwalker?" Kale that's revealed a gentle and refined smile. "Your Highness, we can't fight the horde head-on. The High Elves lack enough vanguards. The arcane constructs are not bad, and the mountain giants are also very powerful, but they are too few in number. Once the vanguard is defeated, all the mages and rangers in the rear will be hunted down by the horde like ducks." Aurelia argued. After hanging out with Duque for so long, she had heard about the tragic battles in the Elven Forest during the Stormwind last year. Aurelia knew very well how terrifying an orc army could be on flat ground when they went all out. In fact, in places like South Shore and the South Flow Coast, the humans had also used high-intensity fortifications to weaken the beastmen's mobility and sharpness to the extreme. That was how they managed to achieve such a magnificent exchange rate. Now Kale, that's actually wanted to fight the horde on the plains? Aurelia felt that not only Kale, but the entire upper echelon of the High Elves had gone crazy. Please watch your tone, Sir Ranger General. In the face of a great battle, your pessimism is the worst. Following the direction of the voice, Aurelia noticed an unusually burly warrior beside the prince. Most of the elves were slender and weak in terms of strength and physique. There were always exceptions to everything. For example, this person in front of him. Just by looking at his figure in the middle of the night, he looked no different from a troll. Tall, strong, bulging muscles filled with surging power and beauty. You are. He couldn't see any military epaulets, but he could tell from the mark on his breastplate that he was a baron. Baron Saguna, a follower of His Highness. Oh, he was a hardcore fan of Kale that's. Despite staying in the Dalajan for many years, Kale, that's had still won over a group of diehard followers who weren't of high status. Aurelia was annoyed with him. I'm not being pessimistic. I'm just objectively speaking as an elf who has really fought against the horde. I'm telling His Highness the difference in strength between us and the enemy. Understand? May I ask how many beastmen you've killed? Saguna raised his nose slightly, his eyes full of disdain. Aurelia narrowed her eyes. The number of kills verified by the Lordaeron Alliance is 1,388 orc warriors. There were already so many verified ones. Those that weren't. This was an era where heroes were worshipped. Killing one person was considered a murderer. Killing 10 people was considered a butcher. But killing 100 people was considered a hero. Not to mention killing the evil beastmen and trolls who had invaded their homeland. Siguna was finally moved. Only now did he remember that this noble and wild female ranger standing in front of him was a very famous hero since the Troll War. At this moment, Kale, that's helped his people out. He pondered for a moment. I understand your concerns, General. Let's do it this way. The plan for the decisive battle remains the same, but the location of the decisive battle will be the plains south of the Eastern Temple. I'll have to trouble the Windrunner's ranger to cover it. Kale, that's pointed to the Windrunner's defensive area, which happened to be the Eastern Temple. It had to be said that after being suppressed by the Council for so many years, the most important skill Kale, that's had learned was compromise. Perhaps this would put him further and further away from the realm of heroes, but it was undoubtedly in line with the national conditions of the upper echelons of Kuel Salis. A qualified and mellow politician would undoubtedly be better off than an upright and outspoken hero. The location of the decisive battle was under the cover of their own defensive line. Even if there was a so-called in case, the army could retreat under the cover of the relatively complete magic defense system of the Holy Temple. Aurelia trembled all over, but in the end, she didn't argue any further. Kale, that's had already given in, at least avoiding the worst outcome. No one could find fault with the decision to withdraw the ranger team, which had suffered the most losses since the start of the war, to the second line. Listening to the surrounding lackeys of the prince flatter her with his highness is wise. Aurelia felt as disgusted as if she had swallowed a fly. She saluted and left. The next day, standing on a high hill and watching the forest and elven villages that were being set ablaze, Orgrim felt a rare sense of elation that he had not felt since the start of the battle. The scouts have reported that the Long-Ears are foolish enough to fight us on the plains? He asked his aide. Is that true? Zulud, the chief of the Dragon Roar tribe, nodded. That's right. They probably believe that before we defeat their vanguard, they can use their damned magic to destroy us. Orgrim sneered. All right, the great orc warriors shouldn't waste their energy on the enemy's magic. Especially when there's a choice, let Ghoul, Dan's new toy, go first. The second battle of the Dark Portal, a completely different battle of Kuel Salis, officially began on the 2nd of June. Hoot 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 hoot. The distinctive horn of the High Elves sounded. The horns of the Horde were usually rough and bold, while the horns of the Alliance were majestic and heroic. While the horns of the Elven Alliance were F***king, the horns of the Elven Alliance were completely used as trumpets. There were even buttons on the trumpets that could be played with cadence. The Elven army, which the royal Sunstrider family had high hopes for, walked out of a lush green forest. The entire enemy's formation was presented in front of these elves who hadn't fought for nearly 3,000 years. The elves sneered. The Horde's formation was too scattered, like a group of beggars gathered together. Chapter 379. There were all kinds of equipment on the tribe's side. War hammers made of stone, spears made of sharpened tree branches, armor made of animal hides that were pieced together from tree branches, and fresh catapults. At first glance, one would think that their opponent was an uncivilized savage tribe. The trolls on the flanks of the orcs were still the same as they were thousands of years ago. The spears were all made out of sharp stones. While they were quite dangerous to the almost unarmored rangers, they were completely useless against the heavily armored elven infantry and arcane constructs. The elven soldiers' initial nervousness disappeared when they saw the scene in front of them, followed by soft laughter. I thought it was some amazing intelligent race that could break through our defense with runes. The rangers at the border are also useless. They actually lost all their dignity to these fellows, sending out dozens of letters for help in a day. The soldiers' laughter drifted into the ears of the rangers stationed at the eastern defense line of the temple. Every elf ranger was furious. The 4 Windrunner sisters stood in different postures. Aurelia stood proudly against the wind like a pine tree. She was expressionless, but anyone could see the pain in her eyes. Servanas crossed his arms and leaned against the shadow of a pillar in the temple. He had his back to the battlefield, and a bone-chilling smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Sasha, who was supposed to be the most lively, hugged her knees and sat on the stairs of the temple, not saying a word. Lilith, on the other hand, covered her forehead with her right palm and looked into the distance. Big sister, it's the trash in front, and the elites of the Blackrock tribe at the back. There seems to be a special fog spell at the back. Duque was right again. Aurelia, the great hero of the Troll War, mumbled to herself in a daze. Soon, her green eyes regained their vigor. As long as Duque is here, the High Elves will not perish. Then she raised her voice and shouted, Hadgeron, Lorthemar. 2 elven rangers immediately walked behind Aurelia. Hadgeron Brightwing reporting. Lorthmatherin reporting. Aurelia turned around. Is everything ready? The 2 ranger captains were a little hesitant. After a short moment of shock, they replied in unison, We're ready. That's good. Aurelia nodded. She didn't realize that she had just given orders to 2 of the 3 most powerful men in Silvermoon City. On the other side, both sides sounded the horns of marching at almost the same time. All the elven warriors did the same action, and put on their helmets. The elven helmets were very different from the Arathor standard helmets commonly used by the Alliance. Its decorative significance was far greater than its actual combat significance. Compared to the half-mask style of the Alliance's helmet, the elven helmet was more like a beautifully carved visor. There were complex patterns and extremely fine dyeing on it. From afar, it seemed as if the entire mountain and plains were reflecting gold and red light. Because of the widespread use of the kite shield, the soldiers' movements were also quite agile. However, when Orgrim saw this relatively narrow shield on the podium, the great chief let out a cold laugh. On the other side, on a huge podium held up by 4 5-meter-tall, huge arcane constructs, the great legitimate heir of the Sunstrider royal family, Kale, showed off his dazzling appearance in front of the army. Every wave of his hand and every movement had an unimaginable charm. Pointing lightly into the distance, Kale shouted, Cover fire! As the messenger's voice spread through the unimaginably mature magic communication system to the mages at the rear. On the hillside near the Eastern Temple, a continuous line of fire lit up the entire horizon, emitting a dazzling light. This was the fireball spell cast by more than 1,000 earth mages at the same time. It was already equivalent to the total number of mages in several human kingdoms, but for the High Elves, this was just the standard. In fact, mages made up more than 1/10 of the elven army. The momentum created by so many mages was incomparably terrifying. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With continuous whistling sounds, countless fireballs passed over the heads of the elven infantrymen and reached the orc stragglers who were beginning to charge on the other side of the battlefield. It was an instinctive premonition of impending disaster. Every orc warrior who was about to be hit felt a tingling sensation on their scalps. None of the orcs panicked, and none of them retreated. They continued to roar as they charged. After 10 seconds, a sea of crimson flames descended from the sky, covering the orcs' already somewhat messy and loose charging formation. More than 800 orc warriors were directly turned into ashes, and twice that number of orcs became burning human-shaped torches, struggling and rolling in the flames. It could be imagined that in a moment, they would become charred corpses. Next, it was time to harvest. That was what the elven infantrymen thought as they advanced with the kite shield in one hand. No army could maintain their morale in a situation where they had suffered such a blow. That was what their instructors said when they were training. Unfortunately, they encountered an exception. Even though more than half of their compatriots had been swallowed by the flames, the orcs whose bodies were relatively intact still launched a frenzied charge. This is impossible. A female mage beside Kale cried out in shock. Kale narrowed his eyes. He pretended to be calm, but the others could hear a trace of trembling in his voice. Marksman unit kill. The charging orcs were already very scattered, and it would be a waste to carry out a blanket attack. Originally, the remaining few hundred orcs should have been handled by the infantrymen. A strong sense of crisis made Kale give the order to finish off the orcs. Unfortunately, his marksman unit had embarrassed him. Marksmen were elites among the rangers. Due to political reasons, The Rangers of the Windrunner family were not qualified to enter the Royal Marksman unit. Their archery was indeed outstanding, but in reality, not many of them had experienced actual combat. They encountered orcs who continued to roar and charge, even though many of their companions had died. Due to various subjective and objective reasons, many marksmen shot the orcs, but they did not hit the vital parts. Kale, that saw with his own eyes an orc with 3 arrows in his cheek, who looked like a porcupine. Even though he was covered in blood, he still killed his way to the front of the elven infantrymen. There are less than 300 orcs left. There should be no problem, right? Kael'Vat said to himself. What happened next almost scared him out of his wits. The elven infantryman formation was destroyed by a mere 300 orcs. Chapter 380. In the face of the orc warriors' heavy hammers, the elven warriors instinctively raised their shields to block according to the military training rules. The orc warriors' movements were too flawed. As long as they could withstand the first blow, the elven warriors would surely be able to kill these stupid and huge monsters in the next round of counterattacks. If they could block the first blow, as if they were rammed by a rampaging rhinoceros, a terrifying force so great that even their brains were instantly numbed came crashing down. Completely unprepared, most of the elven warriors were directly sent flying backwards, knocking over their comrades behind them. Still in midair, the elves next to them could already see that the victim's left arm was unnaturally twisted. There were at least 10 places on the victim's arm that were bent, and a good arm had suddenly become like a snake. Needless to say, it was a completely comminuted fracture caused by the tremendous force. It didn't matter if the orc warriors were chopping, lifting, or sweeping. Every heavy blow was bound to send at least one elven warrior, and his armor flying into the air. That kind of violent power easily exceeded the elven's closed and poor imagination. The orcs who had entered melee combat were on a killing spree. More than 200 huge holes immediately appeared on the entire front line. Baron Sagunnar, who had just argued with Aurelia, was on the front line. He himself was hit by an orc's heavy hammer on his shield, but a powerful force far beyond his own saved his life. Even though he managed to withstand it, there was still a burning sensation in his left arm. His left arm was strained, but his adjutant next to him wasn't so lucky. Even his shield was directly broken into 3 pieces. The orc directly smashed his adjutant's brains with a backhand hammer. Sagunnar, whose face was covered in dirt, barely managed to deal with the orc in front of him with a single sword strike, but he suddenly found that there was no one around him. He glanced around and couldn't help but feel sad. More than 50 elven warriors around him had been crippled by a single round of attacks from a mere 10 dead orcs. Although only a dozen or so had actually died in battle, the rest either had broken arms and could no longer fight, or were directly scared silly. They wouldn't be able to participate in battle for a while. Not to mention that more orcs were rushing out of the fog at this time. Cover fire. Don't stop. Kael'Vat's order was as strict as a textbook. If he didn't want his vanguard to collapse, it was necessary to temporarily suppress the enemy's offensive. In theory, the flames that could destroy all armed forces in the world descended once again, roasting the earth and burning the enemies that rushed out. However, not a single enemy fell. This was because these enemies had bodies that were even bigger and sturdier than the orcs. They had 2 heads and a few dazzling defensive spells. Fire protection was able to absorb fire damage. Ice shield that could absorb all damage. Magic suppression, which reduced magic damage and healing. If he said that this wasn't targeted, he would be lying to a fool. These gigantic monsters that could fight, resist, and cast magic were taking heavy steps that could shake the earth. They cast all sorts of instant cast magic against the elven mages while rapidly approaching the elven infantry, which was already on the verge of collapsing. Kael'Vat's face turned green. Order the arcane automatons and mountain giants to charge. At this point in the battle, Kael'Vat felt very aggrieved. He had no choice but to invest the High Elves' land ace in advance. Using arcane automatons as guards had always been Silvermoon City's policy. This could make up for the lack of melee ability of the elves. The mountain giants, on the other hand, were different. Strictly speaking, The mountain giants were recruited after the great druid of the night elves communicated with the mountain giants and obtained their approval. As the high elves were exiled, the current Kuel-Salis basically lost contact with the mountain giants. These 10 mountain giants were recruited with the help of a few druids who were willing to follow the high elves to the Lordaeron continent. They could be said to be the elves' treasures. Now Kale, Bats had no choice but to play this hand in advance. The appearance of the mountain giants was undoubtedly very shocking. They had a humanoid form, a huge height of more than 30 meters, and their entire bodies were made of granite. Their arms alone were as thick as a carriage. In addition, their petrified skin was enough to withstand most cold weapons, and their magic resistance was not weak. This kind of elemental creature was definitely worthy of being called a war machine. The mountain giant easily attracted the tribe's attention with a huge tree trunk as a weapon. The tribe immediately sent out a response weapon. Goblins. Compared to this terrifying creature, which was almost at the top of the food chain in Draenor, the already terrifying ogres that were 4 or 5 meters tall were just inferior versions of goblins. With a distinct inverted triangular body, a height of more than 10 meters, at least twice the speed and strength of the mountain giants, the appearance of goblins completely tipped the scales of victory in the tribe's favor. Under the siege of a few goblins, the powerful mountain giants were finished in less than 3 minutes. Not to mention the shorter and slower arcane automatons. The entire elven frontline formation had been completely destroyed. At this time, Orgrim raised the hammer of destruction, and a majestic orc picked up the huge horn that hung from the podium to the ground, gathered all the air in his lungs and blew on it. A deep and loud battle cry pierced through the entire battlefield. In the next instant, countless heavily armed orc soldiers charged out of the fog. They were different from the orcs who were equipped like beggars. These orcs were armed to the teeth. They were clad in heavy black armor, and had black helmets on their heads. The horn-shaped spikes on their shoulder plates pointed to the sky. They had a few small axes hanging on their waists, a fan-shaped shield in one hand, and a huge double-edged battle axe or war hammer in the other. Their heavy leg armor and iron shoes stepped on the verdant grassland, each step leaving a deep footprint, and the clanking sound of metal equipment as they ran became one. There was no formation, only the momentum of a rushing river. Like rivers converging into an ocean, countless elite orc soldiers gathered into a torrent of steel, like marching ants, filling up all the gaps in Kale, Bat's field of vision. They appeared all over the mountains and plains, like a tsunami on the surface of the sea when a storm rolled up. The huge wave easily destroyed everything that blocked its way along the way. No, with Prince Kale Bat's lament, almost all the strong men around him had consciously joined the front line, trying to stabilize this collapsing front line. Chapter 381. At this time, the high elven mages were being suppressed by the two-headed ogre mages. The two-headed ogres, who were born with multiple casting abilities, were terrifying. Anyone who tried it would feel good. This wasn't a matter of 1 + 1 = 2. This was the collapse of an elf dealing with a twin mage who had completely surpassed the concept of telepathy. Not only did the two heads cast spells at the same time, they were also smart enough to use fire or ice magic to hit you, while the other used physical attacks like earth spikes. With multiple attributes and perfect coordination, they could often suppress 3 or 4 elven mages of the same level, making them unable to attack the main orc force. The spellbreakers, who were proficient in disrupting the opponent's spellcasting, were not very effective when they reached the front. This was because the two-headed ogre mages cast spells at the same time with 2 different sets of magic circuits. A spellbreaker could only block 1 set of circuits at a time. Unfortunately, those perverts could use more than 1 set of circuits. As a result, the effect of the spellbreaker was very poor. They could only reduce the enemy's combat power by less than 30%. Sharpshooters could indeed shoot arrows into the orc warrior's vitals through the gaps between the metal cans, but there were too few true sharpshooters. Even if a few orcs fell occasionally, the orcs behind them would instantly fill the gap. The elven blade throwers also wildly poured out triangular boomerangs. As long as they hit, they would definitely plow a path of blood among the orcs. The problem was that many elite orc captains were mixed in with the charging troops. Many of the more powerful fellows could even use heavy weapons to deflect the boomerangs shot by the blade throwers. At this moment, Kale, Vats and the high-level elves finally understood what Aurelia meant by the green tide. The enemies in front of them seemed endless, giving them a sense of helplessness as if they couldn't kill all of them. At this moment, the Red Dragon army led by the Roaring Dragon orcs charged out from the huge fog. The orc armored infantry covered the mountains and plains, easily drowning the elven infantry formation. The elves' gorgeous but thin armor exploded in midair as their owners were sent flying. The troll throwers, who were armed with metal spears and had long since upgraded their shotguns to cannons, easily killed the precious spell breakers of Silver Moon City with their spears, which had become much more powerful. The spell breaker's slender kite shield was too small and fragile in the storm of spears. The unstoppable two-headed ogre charged at the front lines, using unimaginable strength and agility that surpassed the concept of ogres, swiftly dismantling the arcane constructs into scraps of components. The mountain giants roared, but their clumsy movements had no effect on Gollin, whose strength was not much inferior to theirs, and whose agility was a notch higher. Each Goron had an orc sitting on a chair nailed to the Goron's back, using chains to control the Goron's movements. The chains were connected to a series of iron rings embedded in Gerald's arms. It was cruel, bloody, but effective. As long as the chains were pulled, the half-tamed Gerald would know to turn or dodge. Unless there was an elven ranger who could shoot down the drivers, these enslaved Gollins were the most terrifying war machines. However, this was not easy. Every driver was an orc from a small clan who had been strengthened by the storm altar. They often had wind shields on them. Arrows that were shot directly were bound to be deflected by the strong wind. This was a war where they were suppressed in all aspects. In almost every aspect, the elves were suppressed by the horde. In the middle of the battlefield, there was an elven flag that was particularly eye-catching. On a red background, there was a golden flame. It was the Eternal Flame Legion. This was the first infantry regiment established by the High Elves after they came east from Kalimdor. It had participated in the Founding War, the first defense of Silver Moon City, and the Troll War 3,000 years ago. Back then, even when facing the terrifying First Legion of the Amani Troll Empire, the arrogant troll elites who outnumbered them 3-1, they still suffered defeat in front of them. Back then, the founding king of Kuel Salis, Dasmare Sunstrider, had said that this was an army that had truly inherited the pioneering spirit of Quell Dorii, the High Elves, and was forged with iron will. With an undying fighting spirit, they could definitely fight to the last soldier on the battlefield. But now this army was almost completely wiped out. When the left and right wings began to collapse, none of the elves among them ran away. They didn't lose to willpower. Instead, they who were still fighting in the old world had lost to the new era. They had lost to the stronger and better equipped Blackrock clan army. The few remaining flags did not last long in the green tide. In the blink of an eye, they were completely submerged. Kale, Vats, who was on the command platform, collapsed on the spot when he saw an orc raise the broken Eternal Flame War flag high up. His pale lips muttered, "It's over. It's over. Everything is over." For his expedition, the Eternal Flame Legion that his father had temporarily transferred to him had actually been completely wiped out in less than 10 minutes in the battle against the Horde. How could he have the face to go back and see his father? The Legion had been completely wiped out, and the war flag had been taken. Anyone who had a slight understanding of the High Elves' military system would understand. The Eternal Flame Legion had completely disappeared from this reality. Its former prestige and all of its glorious history had been taken away by the orcs. In this moment of humiliation, it had completely disappeared from this land. Kale, Vats had almost succeeded in committing suicide. A graceful female mage threw herself at Kale Vats. She was the great astromancer Solarian, a loyal supporter of Prince Kale Vats. "Your Highness, retreat first. Kuel Salis can't live without you. Otherwise, the royal blood will be severed. Let's retreat first and win it back later." More loyal Kale Vats pounced forward and held Kale Vats back. When Kale, that's waved the retreat flag on the command platform, the entire elven front line collapsed like an avalanche. The elves cried and wailed. They threw away all their weapons and equipment, turned around and ran. The greatest taboo on the battlefield was to collapse. Especially when the opponent's speed was no less than their own, collapsing was a nightmare. The orcs laughed and smashed the remaining elves into meat paste. The trolls laughed maniacally and nailed slender elves to the ground with the metal spears provided by the orcs. Looking at the dying elves who were struggling and twisting on the ground like frogs waiting to be dissected, the trolls vented the hatred that had accumulated for thousands of years. The murderous trolls naturally continued to chase the elves, while the psychopathic trolls began the most inhumane killing. They slowly tore these handsome men and beautiful women into pieces. Chapter 382. Yes, the trolls used their hook-like fingers, huge palms, and powerful arms to tear off the flesh of the elves piece by piece. Accompanied by the endless wails of despair and pain was the twisted, hearty laughter of the trolls. The beautifully carved armor could not withstand a blow from the heavy weapons of the orcs. Gorgeous magic could not destroy the enemies that came at them like a tide. Terrified, the mages tore open their magic robes so that they could run faster. Kale, that's even heard a noble female elf mage beg a chocobo cavalryman to take her with him. She was even willing to give up everything for this. In the end, all she got was a lifetime of cold and selfish sneer. Kale, that's did not retreat immediately. He activated all the magic circuits in his body, and frantically threw long-distance fireballs at the densest part of the battlefield. As a radiant moon mage, the power of his rage was quite astonishing. The continuous fireballs formed a small belt of fire, blocking a considerable portion of the orcs' advance. In the past, Kale, that's actions would have been enough to win him a round of applause. There were no cheers, no praises. None of the elves saved by Kale, that's dared to look up at their prince. They all lowered their heads and ran wildly. However, when an even larger two-headed ogre mage appeared and used magic that was not inferior to Kale, that's magic to shoot at him, the situation took a turn for the worse. On this day, the undefeatable legend of the two-headed ogre mage was branded in the hearts of the proud high elves for the first time. Faster casting speed, higher density of elemental particles, and more perfect coordination. Fighting with a two-handed ogre mage felt no different from fighting a team of experienced mages of the same level. Your Highness, let's go. Astromancer Caponia used her fire magic to share Kale, that's burden. Baron Saguna, who had rushed back from the front lines, used his powerful arm strength to drag Kale, that's away. Kale that's did not want to leave. He wanted to be the one to bring up the rear. But everything was over. His army collapsed like a landslide. In the distance, on the black land that had been scorched by the fire, the pale stone limbs of the mountain giants were scattered all over the ground. These enormous guardian spirits that the elves had to look up to at all times were now crawling in the middle of the battlefield, as if they were in a deep sleep. The sleeping mountain giant was no different from a small hill. Kalevets knew that it had fallen asleep forever. He recognized this mountain giant. When he was very young, when he was officially declared the crown prince by his father had personally awakened this giant named Little. He still remembered how gentle Xiao Xiao was. She didn't even want to disturb the birds that were nesting on her. After the elves moved all the nests away, they happily carried him around the edge of the Long Song forest. Even though he was still young, he still remembered how insufferably arrogant he looked when he stood on Xiao Xiao's body. He told himself, I will become the king of this land, and Xiao Xiao will be my moving castle. At that time, he felt that Xiao Xiao was so powerful and impossible to defeat. But now, after being attacked countless times by the huge and ferocious Gorons with their huge claws covered in steel, Xiao Xiao finally lost all signs of life and aura. Xiao Xiao was no longer a powerful elemental creature. It returned to the origin of Mother Earth and became a pile of stones again. Mountain giant Xiao Xiao. No, Kalevets cried. The eastern temple was clearly behind him, and the distance of 2,000 meters would normally be covered in a short walk. But such a short distance was completely covered by the high elves. On the battlefield, Orgrim rode a tall wolf and found Zhu Jin, who was covered in blood. Zhu Jin, how is it? Doesn't it feel good to be a brother of the beastmen? Ha ha ha. Orgrim laughed boldly. Zhu Jin, who was covered in blood, stuck out his long tongue and licked the elven flesh on his fangs. He revealed an extremely satisfied grin. The taste of revenge is great, my great chief, but it's not enough. This is not enough to vent the hatred of the Amani Empire for 6,000 years. Only with the destruction of Silvery Moon and the extinction of the High Elves can the souls of the tens of thousands of angry great demons rest in peace. Orgrim patted Zhu Jin's shoulder. Then what are you waiting for? Follow me. If you're too slow, don't complain that the beastmen didn't leave a few living elves for you. Ha! Looking at Orgrim's back, Zhu Jin showed a rare expression of admiration. He whistled and summoned his velociraptor mount, catching up with large strides. Prince Kael'Vetz had almost died for his country. Before he reached the defensive range of the Eastern Temple, he was caught up by the tribal heroes led by Gujar. The chief of the Shattered Palm clan, Kargith Bladefist, had been summoned by Ghoul, Dan using a teleportation spell. He used his frenzied and fast slashes to beat Sagunnar like a dog. Gujar used his advantage of two-headed combo attacks to easily suppress Kael'Vetz by himself. The chief of the Dragonmaw clan, Zuluhid, suppressed the two Astromancers, Caponia and Solarian, by himself. Kael'Vetz's subordinate, Saladre, was being beaten to a pulp by a sword saint of the Fireblade clan. It was only a matter of time before he died. At this moment the arrows came. The mysterious and shadowless fierce wind arrow. The domineering lightning arrow. The two arrows had completely different feelings. They clearly came from the hands of two female elves wearing green capes, but it made people feel as if they had mobilized two armies of archers. The overwhelming pressure made it hard for the heroes of the tribe to breathe. A beastman driver tried to have a Golan attack the two elves, who knew that with just one arrow, the huge Golan's head and the driver's head on its back would both be shot in the head. The scene of two heads, one big and one small, exploding like rotten watermelons was shocking. It had to be known that the archer was still 300 meters away. Your Highness, please retreat. It was Aurelia Windrunner's voice. Kael'Vetz was ashamed. He brought his companions and retreated with his tail between his legs. Even though he left behind a thank you, he could not hide his embarrassment. That night, the tribe used a huge metal wheel that was as tall as a 7-story building as a siege vehicle. It withstood the bombardment of the magic equipment on the temple and forced the battle into hand-to-hand combat. After 3 hours of fighting, the Eastern Temple's defense line fell. On the second day after Kael'Vetz escaped back to Silvermoon City, the triumphant council thought that they had finally found a chance to attack the royal family. They criticized Kael'Vetz for his poor command, causing the death of 20,000 elite high elves in battle. At the same time, they issued a motion to restrict the royal power, and announced that the pillars of the high elves, formed by the private soldiers and high-level mages of the council, would personally kill all the invaders in the Longsong Forest. However, a day later, the bad news of the destruction of the 40,000 High Elves' army came. The High Elves were in a desperate situation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.